No, okay. The Centerville City Council is now in session. We appreciate your patience as we had some technical difficulties getting started. We've just completed a City Council work session on cemetery and how to find some additional space in it. We will note for the record that all members of the City Council are here and accounted for. We appreciate so many of you coming out to join us tonight. We'll start tonight with a Pledge of Allegiance, so I'll ask you to all stand and join me in that, after which our good friend, Pastor Lauren Pankratz, is here and will offer a prayer or a thought for us. So please join with me in the pledge.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you for having me. My name is Lauren Pankratz. I'm the pastor of the Bridge community here in Centerville. So, would you guys just bow with me in prayer tonight? Father, we are truly blessed to live in just an amazing nation. God, we have many rulers who rule well, and we pray for just extra wisdom for them today. We pray that they would, Lord, execute their jobs with the best intentions and with, Lord, expediency that other nations would just marvel at, God. So we just pray that you would just do an amazing work in the lives of our rulers, governors, God, leaders. Lord, we live in a wonderful city. God, we love this place, and what a beautiful place you've given us to live. God, let us just appreciate that as we are on the roads and we look up at the mountains, and Lord, we just see your handiwork. What an amazing place to live. And Lord, you've given us just tremendous men and women who lead this city well, and we are grateful for them. So we thank you, God, but we also ask that you would, Lord, just give them just tremendous insight and wisdom to how to lead the city forward, God, that we would be just an amazing place for generations and generations. God would look to the leadership of our city council and just be in awe at the wisdom you give them. So we do pray that you'd give them that insight into those pressing matters that are on their agenda today and those things that will come up tomorrow, God. We just know that you will give them what they need, and so we ask that for them. So we're grateful today for all the blessings you give us. So we ask this in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen. Amen. Thank you very much. We appreciate you sharing with us that prayer, Pastor Lauren, and all the other service that you've provided our community over the years. Before we move to our open session, we have another proclamation we'd like to share with you. Karen Webb of the Baha'i Faith has asked has suggested that we note the 200th anniversary of the birth of looks like the founder of the Baha'i Faith. So we've prepared a proclamation that I'll read a few things from, if that's all right. Whereas the Baha'i community of Centerville, Utah was established in 1999, whereas a crying need of humanity is the achievement of unity, peace, and justice in our community. Whereas in the 19th century, Baha'u'llah, the founder of the Baha'i Faith, brought a message of human dignity, capacity, and oneness suited for the requirements of contemporary life. And October 22nd, 2017 marks the 200th anniversary of the birth of Baha'u'llah. And whereas since 1999, the Baha'i community of Centerville, Utah has striven to apply the vision to the material and spiritual life of Centerville, collaborating with others to promote unity and serve their fellow citizens. And whereas the Baha'i of Centerville and their families, friends, and neighbors and colleagues are commemorating this bicentenary, along with the Baha'i across the United States and the world, therefore, the mayor of Centerville as mayor of Centerville, to hereby declare Sunday, October 22nd, as the bicentenary of the birth of Baha'u'llah. I'm sure I didn't say that right, but in this city, and we urge all to resolve on this day to promote themselves and in their relation with others, those qualities and attributes that will help bring about the recognition of oneness of humanity, to embrace diversity, and to work for unity in our local community, in our country, and in the world. I will present this to you and appreciate your participation in our community. Thank you very much. Thank you. With that, we'll go ahead and move to the next item on our agenda, which is an open session, a time to allow any members of our community to speak on any matter of municipal concern. I think we've got a few folks here that are related to the maybe the Trails Committee agenda items later on the agenda. And we invite you to come and state your name and city of residence for the record, and invite you to make comments with us. We'd ask you to keep them to 2 minutes or so.
Thank you, Mayor Cutler. I'll take less than 2 minutes. I'm Mark Oligschlager. I'm a Centerville resident, a member of the Trails Committee. There are several here tonight who want to express support for bike trails. We understand that this is not a public hearing tonight on that matter, and that you have 3 other public hearings this evening. We wanted you to have the benefit of knowing, even without us, we didn't want to dissuade anyone from coming. We certainly didn't want to have people expect that this would be a public hearing as well, so we didn't really go out and actively recruit. We do have a couple of here from Island View Drive in that area to give you some very brief input. We just ask that for those who speak that you keep it brief out of respect for their long agenda tonight, but it will be good to hear from, we have some young people and some others that would like to say a couple of words, so thank you so much.
Great. Thank you.
I'm Richard Parker. I live here in Centerville since 1991. I just want to make 3 points in support of this mountain biking issue. One, I would ask those that are kind of in charge or first line or responsible for interacting with someone that might do property damage. Let's ask our police department to give their input as to whether this would be a negative thing or a positive thing. Okay? Number 2, any and every good thing that's built anywhere, people will choose to use it for good or bad. So do we stop building good things? No. And the 3rd point, and I'm a road cycler, but for safety issue alone, mountain trail biking has got to be safer than road biking. I have many friends who have been hit on the road, and if they're going to get in an accident, the chance of fatality or major bodily harm is much higher with the road cycling than mountain trail biking. And those are my points I'd ask you to consider. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm Bailey Smith. I live in Centerville. I just wanted to comment about the mountain bike trails. I have 4 young kids. We love to get outside and mountain bike. It's hard to take them up to Park City, which is where we have to go. We would love to have trails here, close to our home. I think mountain biking is such a positive activity for children. It really builds confidence in themselves. It's a great sport, and my children love it, and I would love, love, love to have trails nearby, and thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Bailey.
Hi, my name is Brent Jones. I'm from Centerville City. I actually live on Island View Drive. Me and many of my neighbors, we were very excited to hear about the prospect of having the bike trails up above our house for many reasons. One, for the obvious just benefit of community. It is a good thing. It's a great thing to get your kids out to do. We don't do a ton of it, but I know I have several friends that do a lot of it, and they get their kids out, and it's a great thing. The other benefit that we see is the thing that we hate on Island View Drive is the dirt bikes going 100 miles an hour up and down our streets, going up above there, and all of the dust coming back down into our neighborhoods. And we see that the dirt biking as a much better use of the land up there, and I think it would apply to a lot more people than the several. There's not a ton of people that use it for the dirt biking, but when they use it, in our mind, it's dangerous for our kids because of the speed that they go up and down, and in my mind, the destruction of the land with the motorcycles. So we would much rather see bikes, the mountain bikes and the trails and the opportunities that we think it would afford more people in our community. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi, my name's Doug Larson. I'm a Centerville resident. Actually, I've been in this neighborhood for my whole life, on and off. I've enjoyed these mountains, these foothills, since I was born. I love this area because of the beautiful mountains. One of the things that has always been I've always desired is that we actually we're able to use some of the mountainside a little bit more than we do. We hike on it. Sometimes we do go up and bike on it, but there really isn't an established trail system up there that's useful. I know that the other cities along the mountains, all through Davis County, all have trailheads. They all have established trails where they're marked, and it makes it safer. It makes the trail development much easier. I happen to be an avid mountain biker myself, and people in the mountain biking community are more than willing to get up into the mountains and actually help build these trails, which by itself is a community building activity. I know that there are kids who want to do this for Eagle projects. This is a family-friendly activity, and we do it in our family. We love it, and actually, I actually happen to work for the schools. And just as a side note, mountain biking, the mountain biking program that's been developed in Utah is the fastest growing sport in the state, and it brings in a lot of kids who wouldn't normally otherwise be involved in not just competitive athletics, but any athletics. And it gets kids outside, it gets them on bikes, it gets them exercising, gets them out in the fresh air, gets them up in the mountains, really where I believe they belong. And so I hope you give strong consideration, at least to studying this and giving it an opportunity to proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Doug.
My name is Matt Larson. I am a resident of my father's house, which is in Centerville. I am a child, if you haven't noticed. I do go over to this school over here, Centerville Junior High. I love it there. It's pretty awesome or whatever. But the problem is that not really many kids are on mountain biking teams over there, like what my dad said, the community of the teams and everything. So I was kind of hoping that the trails would get more people to want to go and actually ride their bike, because I am on the Ascent Academy team, and when I first got there, it was the first year of the team, and some of the kids didn't even know what the difference between a mountain bike and a road bike were. So when I heard that the Trails Committee might build a jump park, I jumped at least 3 feet out of my seat, because I've kind of always wanted to do that awesome stuff or whatever, but I've only ever done it a couple times, because the really good ones, you have to take your bike and go all the way up to like Snow Basin or even just like Moab or whatever, and it just takes forever to get down there. And so I was really hoping that we could have one closer for me and for everybody else, but also me. So yeah.
Thanks, Matt.
Vlad Marshall, Centerville resident. I live on the corner of Island View Drive and 100 South, so right kind of where the main traffic, I guess, that goes up, at least in our city. it's interesting, as you know, I heard about the plan and some of the things that they're wanting to do. Just about 4 months ago, I went down to California or to Colorado and visited my brother, and they have one of the best mountain bike areas that it's kind of been developed naturally called Phil's World outside of Cortez. And my brother said, let's go check it out. You can borrow my bike. And we went out mountain biking, and it was amazing. So I'm all in favor of, doing the study and getting some plans and some things for us to consider. I think it would be great to develop that land in that manner rather than, who knows what else could happen if we don't do anything with it. It's a great form of conservation, and I think an actual benefit to residents, and something that can kind of build that community sense that I think we're so proud of as Centerville residents. So myself, my neighbor right across the street, we have little kids. I think we're impacted by the traffic that goes up there. But even if there is an increase in traffic, I'm still fully in favor of moving forward with this, because I think the benefits far outweigh any, traffic concerns. There's already traffic with the motorbike people. It's not that bad. We're right there. We see all of it. And like I said, I think the benefits of having something like this in our community would be awesome. So I fully support it. So does my neighbor across the street, Logan Iverson. He wasn't able to come because he has school tonight. So
Thanks, Lad.
I'm Isaac Dunson. I live in Centerville, and I don't really know what to say, but I'm really big into this whole mountain biking thing, and I really want some trails here, and I really support it, and I actually want to try to introduce my Eagle Scout project into maybe helping build some of these trails and jumps up in the mountains.
Anybody else like to speak while you're here?
Hi, my name is Jameson Yardley, and lived in Centerville pretty much since 1978, with a brief stint in New York in between. But for the most part, Centerville is my home. I grew up here. Moved here when I was 8 years old. In 1991, I bought my first mountain bike. It was kind of a new sport in this area. It was an expensive bike. I was a college kid. My mom freaked out about how much money I spent on the bike at the time. My dad said, if I was his age, I'd do the exact same thing. And my bikes haven't gotten any cheaper since then. Some summers, some weeks, you can see me riding along the Bonneville Shoreline Trail and the limited trail network that we have here in Centerville that runs basically east and south, north and west, or north and south, almost daily. I love riding. My typical route is I'll ride up Chase Lane, up towards Hadads, and then get on the trail, get on the Fire Road, and then connect into one of the little trails from there. We don't have a lot of good trails here. It's just one single trail, from my house, this just sits off Chase Lane, to the end of that road. If you go south, you can't connect up to the gun range. It's about a 9-mile out and back total. So 4.5 out and 4.5 back. But it's a fun little trail. And it would be awesome to make it even better and to extend it even better. There's a study that's going around right now that says that we're currently raising the first generation of kids that will actually die 5 years sooner than their parents. And the mountain biking community, getting more kids on bikes, like was previously mentioned by Doug Larson, it is the fastest growing sport in the United States. It's a club sport still. All kids ride, all kids have fun. But if we could introduce additional things like that in our community to help increase and improve the health of our children, what an awesome thing. What a great responsibility we have as parents to help our children become more active and more fit, you know, instead of staying glued to their iPhones and their other devices all day long. Getting them outside. The kids love it. There's a reason why the Utah Mountain Biking League is, or the High School Mountain Biking League is the fastest growing league in the United States, because we have prime community for it. You know, other communities along Davis County, you know, Kaysville has a nice little mountain bike park there at the Wilderness Park there. It's a little loop. It's maintained by the local mountain biking community for the most part, and that's the. But otherwise, there's not a whole lot of other things besides Mueller Park, where people can go and ride. Besides just the limited fire roads and some offshoots here in Davis County, and you know we need something like this. It will definitely benefit our community. It will help strengthen our children. It will help just improve the lives of those here in our area. So I am fully in support of this, and I hope you on the City Council will be supportive of it as well. Thanks.
Thanks, Jameson.
I'm Matt Larson, Centerville resident. Just want to throw one more voice in the mix. We have obesity epidemic in our country, in our community. We're raising kids that are addicted to electronic devices. This is the kind of thing that we can get ourselves and our kids out of the house and up in the hills and active, and you know exactly what we need, in my opinion. And we'll build a community. One of the primary reasons many people want to live in this area is immediate access to the mountains, and it'd be a shame to go miss an opportunity to improve on that and provide this opportunity. Thanks.
Thanks, Matt.
My name is Blair Parrish. I'm probably the second longest resident in Centerville in this room. Back when I was a kid, there was a sand pit above, between Chase Lane and Parrish Lane. And as a kid, we would go ride our bikes up there all the time. Now this is way before there was any mountain bikes. I still have my Stingray that we would ride, I rode up there. But that has gone away. And I just see this as something that could really benefit the community. I think it's a really good thing. Thanks.
Thanks, Blair. Anybody else who'd like to speak? If not, we'll go ahead and close the open session. And I want to take a minute to thank so many of you for coming out and speaking to us. We usually don't get this many, so we're really glad to have you come out and spend a few minutes with us. We've got lots of other exciting things on the agenda if you want to stay for a few hours. We're talking about whether to allow catering and density calculations in zoning, and the possibility of potentially a hotel coming to Centerville on the west side. So, but if you have to go get on your bike, we'll understand that as well. So thank you for your comments. Next item on the agenda is a minutes review and acceptance. We have minutes from the October 3rd work session and regular city council meeting, and the October 5th work session. Anybody have any changes to those meeting minutes that are suggested? I don't think I had any.
I'd make, excuse me, I'd make a motion that we accept the minutes as posted.
Second.
So moved and seconded, we accept the 3 sets of minutes as prepared. Any further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Next, we have a summary action calendar, 3 items on that calendar. A list of poll workers for the general election, a warranty period commencement for the Mickelson Meadows subdivision, and third, a bid award to Delco Western for $33,000 for installation of reservoir pumps, for the community park expansion that we're doing. Any questions on any of those? If not, I'd look for a motion to approve those items.
I move that we approve the 3 items on the summary action calendar.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded. Any further discussion on these 3 items? All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? That passes unanimously. Thank you. Okay, next up, we have a public hearing scheduled for a zoning code amendment on catering limited being allowed in the commercial medium zone, which is along Main Street. So first, we'll have a staff report from our very capable assistant planner, Cassie. And then if the applicant is here, we'll hear from the applicant before we open the public hearing.
Thank you, Council. So the applicant before you is for the creation of the definition for catering limited as a conditional use permit in commercial medium zones. Obviously, the applicant in question is a representative from Cup Bob Korean Fast Food. And they do have a site in mind, but obviously it's important to keep in mind that this would be considering all catering services in the future in regards to wedding and banquet and anything that would be considered catering food service in the commercial medium zone, which is exclusively on our Main Street corridor. As it states in the general plan, the Main Street area should be seriously considered for revitalization and restoration due to the deterioration and a few vacant businesses that have been not kept up along this street. And so the general plans encourages restoration of this area. And I know that you guys are thinking about doing that in the future in the next few weeks to reconsider the Main Street overlay corridor in general. We as a staff think that the best way to do this is to open up uses in this area. Currently there's only about 10 permitted uses in the commercial medium zone, and we don't think that's really enough to keep all these businesses going. That's why you see so many offices and dentists in the area, but not a lot else. So we think the best way to revitalize this area would just be to include more uses in our table of uses for this zone. We believe that the catering limited definition that would limit the number of trucks and transport vehicles based on the size and the capacity of the business would reduce the concerns about just a fleet of vehicles in the area or any traffic concerns. And also the conditional use permit would have the ability to place conditions on the site in particular. So if there were any concerns in regards to circulation or parking or even hours of operation, those could all be limited with a set of conditions with the CUP process. So the Planning Commission a few weeks ago did have some concerns with the definition and the use in this zone because they thought it was a little bit of an industrial use or an accessory use without the benefit of a primary use. But as a staff, we still believe that this use really would have a very low impact on this area. In regards to traffic, I think it would have a lot less than some of the other uses that are already permitted there, and it really wouldn't cause too much consequence on Main Street as a whole other than get a business where one should be. So they did end up passing it with. So do you guys have any questions?
Cassie, was there any discussion of, in the past when we've had food establishments along Main Street, sometimes there have been complaints, at least for a previous restaurant, about the smell and controlling the odors that are associated with that. Was there any discussion of that with catering limited?
In in terms of this applicant, I think the applicant can speak to that in particular of his site. It's not something that he's concerned about for his site in particular, and most of the food will be brought off-site. Obviously, some cooking will, like the cooking will be done at the site, but I don't see it as a huge concern.
Did the Planning Commission discuss it?
It came up, but it wasn't dwelled on.
Any other questions for staff before we hear from the applicant, Mr. Hatch?
Could you tell me what the vote was, Cassie? Because the minutes from the Planning Commission are cut off on the one that I was looking at.
There were 2 no's.
Yeah, it looks like 4-2.
4-2 with 1 absent.
Thank you.
So this would be a new use, but a new use going into an old building, right?
Correct.
So it's only the use that would be being considered when the permit application is submitted. Is that correct?
The CUP, you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so we don't have a catering use definition, so this ordinance would create that definition as a whole and allow it as a CUP in this zone.
So in the existing overlay, I know that the ordinance is written to encourage that front commercial space to be inviting to the public, to be something that would be used by the public. And so in this situation, I see that, and I'm asking a question, so you can let me know if I'm seeing it correctly, but as contrary to that intent, whereas something is going on behind closed doors and there's not an intent to invite the public in, which in my mind is kind of the definition of a Main Street business.
Sure, and that was definitely a concern at the Planning Commission as well, because there's not that primary use of, say, having Cup Up as a restaurant and also do catering. But those businesses also aren't allowed on Main Street right now, like a restaurant. So this is what they wanted to do as a catering. And even though things like restaurants and other walkable customer-oriented business also aren't allowed on Main Street right now. So I think just opening up as many uses, I think in the future down the line, we do want to look at those other uses in the future.
Right, and I agree, and the draw to that for me would be that it would be inviting the local public in to use the space. So are you saying that this concern was discussed at the Planning Commission level? And
yes.
Did they discuss that they might consider catering limited use if it also included something that invited the public in?
That was an implication.
Okay.
Yeah. What the Planning Commission brought up was the discussion of as they looked at the occupancy changes, any of the issues of non-conforming, depending on what the use may decide to do, will address whether it's going to stay within the confines of the building, which I think in this case for the applicant, that's the plan. But as a use, if there were changes and additions, it would be checked against that overlay zone and see if some of those changes are instituted based on what they're planning with the property. That's what the Planning Commission focused on from a Main Street plan standpoint. You know, from our standpoint, you know, there was a little bit of discussion of what you're mentioning. Well, this is not really a retail center to come in and get some noodles, you know. And how do you distinguish between when you take a catering limited use, you have somebody that might serve corporate events, but you might have somebody that serves weddings. And so it really gets hard in a use definition to try to pare it down to say only this type of catering is allowed. This opens it up. You can do, somebody come in, so an example I brought up and had discussions with a council member on the phone about was we have a person that runs a bakery in a basement right now in a residential zone. Where's a place for that to go without a high rent and be a local service? Now that's a different use than the catering we're talking about, but the same thing would be the gentleman that cooks for the police department. Public Works also hires them on his part-time basis for when Kenny retires, and we had a great meal out of it. Where's a place for that person to move out of their home and into the community? And you do have the tension that, you know, the difference between a pizza smell the rice cooking smell and the barbecue smell it can create those tensions there. But you still have to balance the success of the main street with the residents behind. And when the Jade Hill came in under the parameters of continuing the old restaurant use that was there, because that restaurant use had expired, the conditions that were put into place is they moved the equipment that was blowing out the back end of the building towards the home and moved it and screened it up on top of the roof. Does that solve all problems? No. But it begins to mitigate and let the airflow go different than sitting in your front yard on the front porch and it blowing directly into your yard. So you will have those tensions. I don't think you'll get away from any of your uses on Main Street from those tensions. You just have to have a vision of what your Main Street's going to be. And then as those tensions show up, you do your best to mitigate them, take into account everybody's concerns, but you really need to stick to the balance between the impacts and the success of Main Street. And what we're seeing from our standpoint is Main Street's deteriorating because everything is looked at. It's a change, it's a negative, it has this impact. We don't want to live in it. We want a perfect way of operating Main Street, and there's just no way to do that. You're going to have to say, here's the success of Main Street, here's the impacts to the surrounding neighborhood, what's the best way to balance it and place it there. And our view of the catering is these local businesses, this entrepreneurship lifestyle corridor. From our discussions and the feedback we're getting as planners, your retail centers are dead. We're not a tourist town for like Moab, so we're not going to get the t-shirt shops. Our CVS pharmacies are not coming to Main Street. Your property sizes are not big enough for those type of uses there. And so when you look at the change in retail, your successes are in your lifestyle choices. It's why you see Farmington Station so successful. They add all the box stores around it, but they have the lifestyle choices around it. So it's your exercise, it's your gyms, it's your microbreweries, it's your salons, it's your local bakeries, it's your delis, it's your bistros. Those are the success that happen in a commercial area, if that's your vision of Main Street. And right now with the CM zone being placed there and the success of the CM zone is really only office and dentistry, we're having struggle filling into the niche that could be in there. And so we look at catering as a potential consideration for local business growth. One owner might set up the kitchen for the corporate events, but as they expand and change, because it is a limited basis, then that may open up an opportunity for the person who owns the property or manages the property to go to a wedding caterer or some other banquet caterer that can be an entrepreneurial business, and that's why we're supporting it.
Thank you.
Follow-up question on that. So are you saying, though, if that's the desire that we have is to balance providing that need, but also asking to leave the door open for inviting the public in, which is what we imagine as Main Street business, is that something that you feel would be written into the use being allowed, or is that something that gets written into the overlay so that when expansion happens that's required? Where do you think
Well, I don't see you saying a business has to cater to a public, pun intended on the catering part. I think you realize that the person that's making the orthodontics across the street next to, that's not really an open business. He's doing it for the dentist. You have very few people that are walking and traveling out and ordering it. He's a manufacturer for your Don's Meats, that's the traveling public. So you're going to have the balance between the office space, the catering space, if you allow it, the retail sales of specialty meats. I don't think you really can regulate that every business has to have this walk-in capability. You just create the opportunity for synergy to occur, and then as you bring people in and as people use facilities, they become more engaged in that local area and commitment to that local area, and it's going to be a variety of uses.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions for staff? If not, let's hear from the applicant if you'd like to say anything before we go to a public hearing.
Hi, I'm Nate Hatch. Thanks for hearing and considering this text amendment. First of all, I'd like to thank Cassie and Corey for the work that they've put in helping draft the text amendment. I think they've done a good job there. I want to address just a couple of things that have come up. I want to talk a little bit about community. I think Councilwoman Fillmore had a really good idea. We can open tomorrow. So let's open it up to the public, and then that problem's solved. We realize that right now the CM zone is not set up such that restaurants are allowed, and that's fine. So for the time being, we'd love to cater out of there. A little bit about Cup Bop and how we're involved with the community here is, the 4th of July event for the last 2 years, both the carnival on Friday night and Saturday night, the next day, the 4th of July, we cater that event, and it seems like everybody's just there for us. If you've seen Cup Bop there, there's a big line. Opening day at the ballpark, when the ballpark opens in Centerville, the same thing. We're invited to that, and it's a real sense of community. We love to be involved there. A lot of the local businesses use us as well. Target, when Target is wanting to do some promotional things and really generate community, they invite us to come there. Les Schwab invites us to come there. It's a really good use. Les Schwab, wants to attract attention to their business right off the freeway. We like to feed their customers. And so a lot of those things we do for the community. Additionally, I think it should be noted at Viewmont High, Viewmont High has us come up and do events for them as well. But every time we do an event for a junior high, elementary school, or high school, we donate back to that school 10% of the funds. And at those big events, at those football games or whatever it is, that ends up being a lot of money, and it really goes a long way for the community. So we love to be involved in the community. We'd like to be more involved in Centerville. And to Councilwoman Fillmore's point again, we'd love to open. And we would if it were zoned such. The second thing I wanted to address that came up was Mayor Cutler mentioned something about the odor. And so I just wanted to clarify a little bit about odor and how restaurants create odor. So restaurants that cook at high temperatures, they can't have those temperatures come back into the building. So they have to ventilate those through the roof. And so if you drive past Pizza Perfect, you'll notice there's 3 big silver domes on the back of that building. And so when you're cooking pizzas at those high temperatures, it needs to get rid of that hot air, and it pushes it up, and you can smell it in the community. So catering limited is also limited in terms of the type of equipment that's needed. So for this particular building, the ventilation system, the exterior ventilation system, has been taken out. At one point, it was a Domino's Pizza. At one point, it was Jade Hill. But since then, all the exterior ventilation has been removed. Additionally, Cup Bop does not use any equipment that cooks at such high temperatures that it needs to be ventilated. We use rice cookers, and we make noodles. And we make noodles the same way that you guys make ramen noodles. We just add hot water to it. And so those are the types of activities that will be happening in the kitchen. We love this space on Main Street. It's close to the freeway. There's a lot of other really convenient things on Main Street for us. There's a car wash, there's a gas station, and it's great for us. The building itself, we didn't have to do anything to it, which is great because it was a restaurant before. So it's got a mop sink. It's got all the other prep sinks in it. It's got plastic on the walls. Additionally, this space has a big 18 by 27 foot space on the side of the building with a door, so that when we're loading one of our mobile vehicles, it discreetly backs in there, we load it up, and we're out. So I've got one person doing the prep work there. There's 10 stalls in the place. We'll be using one for our prep person. And really light use. Typically, we leave by about 10 a.m. in the morning. And for example, today we went to Hill Air Force Base. Monday we went to Weber State University. During the winter, we typically just do a lunch event. During the summer, that's where you'll see us at the night events. in the community. So real simple operation. It's noodles and rice. There's no odor, and there's really limited traffic. We have one vendor that comes twice a week. A convenience store, I have some convenience stores, they've got 30 vendors coming in and out of there. I've got one vendor coming twice a week. So I think the impact is really fairly limited. So anyways, any questions I'd open up to if I can help. Otherwise, I think I've said my piece.
I do have one question.
Uh-huh.
If it were allowed, would you want to use the front parking lot space to park a food truck?
I don't know that I'm really attracted to parking a mobile on the front there. The nice thing about this building is that I mentioned there's a space that's 18 feet by about 27 feet on the side. I think that's probably the best place for maybe one of the mobiles. The other thing about this building is on the other side, on the north side, it's got an 18 by 52 foot space that's behind a fence. So I think it probably makes the most sense for any catering transport vehicles to be on the sides. Any that wouldn't normally fit into a regular stall to be on the side. There's plenty of use.
But what I mean is not for parking when it's not in use, but if it were an allowed use, would you want to run the food truck from that spot?
I'll make you Korean barbecue from that parking lot any day, any day. That's not written into the plan because it's not allowed right now. But absolutely, you know, we go to Les Schwab in Bountiful, we go to Les Schwab in Centerville. This road is really, really busy. We'd love to. If it's a distraction for residents, that's fine, we won't. If it's an attraction for residents, by all means. We can open a truck tomorrow, or we could do some takeout there. I mean, we could do delivery. Will it be as discreet or as involved, I think, as the community wants us to be. So.
How many trucks do you have?
So out of this particular location, I would just plan to run 2 mobiles. We have some bigger commissaries and kitchens in Salt Lake, and right now we dispatch from those locations up into Davis and Weber County. And so the travel and travel cost to come up here is really pretty high, but the biggest cost is I'm paying guys to sit in the truck for 45 minutes to come here and 45 minutes to come back. For that cost, I can almost pay for this commissary. I used to have an office in Centerville. I would just have a little office in there. If you look at the layout of the space, there's office, there's storage, there's a small kitchen, and then there's a dish room, and it's already there. It's not like we're putting in anything. So, yeah, good question.
So full disclosure, I'm a big fan of Cup Bop. So where can I get it if you come? but you also have meat and kimchi and other products.
Uh-huh.
How can you say this will only be rice and noodles? Are those prepared somewhere else?
So some of the products that we have are prepared in bulk before, like rice and noodles. Other products that we sell are prepared on site. So it's different based on the mix.
So you wouldn't be doing any of your meat products out of this one?
So we would marinate the meat products out of this location, but when we cook those, we would just cook them in a mobile. That's the plan, it's just to cook those in the mobile.
Unless we can get the council to allow
Unless we can get the
takeouts.
council hungry and,
Any other questions for Mr. Hatch before we open the public hearing? Thank you. This is scheduled for a public hearing, so we'll go ahead and open the public hearing and invite anyone who would like to come and speak about allowing catering limited in the commercial medium zone, which is the immediate application.
Okay, my name is Astrid Paxton, and I live in the red house directly behind where Cup Bop is proposing. And I do have to say, we have chased down the Cup Bop truck like millions of times. so this is not so much a Cup Bop issue. And in fact, like, my kid, when he read Cup Bop on the back of one of your trailers, was like so excited to run in and tell Dad that Cup Bop parked there. My concern arose more so the end of August when I saw the Old Dominion freight line bringing the semi-truck through down 200 South to deliver product to Cup Bop. Sorry, I'm breathing into that. And so I am concerned about it, like as far as products, if you have like Cisco or Nicholas, those type of food companies, if they're going to be driving through a neighborhood full of tons of kids. I mean, Robin Meekum's grandkids constantly are riding across 200 South, you know, to get to grandma's house, to get to school, to get to other kids' houses, and the safety concern that it can cause for the children in that neighborhood with the visibility. If it were on Main Street, again, there's the visibility of the junior high kids. Because the parking lot is not a huge parking lot for delivery trucks to pull in and out of. So that's where my main concern arises of how the delivery will get there, if that makes sense. I realize there are, you know, far worse things that could be happening, but it is. I'm like, one kid lost. I did see two, when that delivery came, they parked it directly in front of the fire hydrant to deliver whatever it was there. And I was like, well, even though the fire department's right behind me, it could be a huge problem if an emergency arose. And that's my primary concern. I mean, smell, yes, but I have to think if I was stuck next to a smelly person on an airplane, I'm stuck next to a smelly person on an airplane for the duration of the flight. So I recognize I live next to commercial property. It's more so, is it going to bring unwanted traffic into the area for deliveries? And that's it.
Thank you very much, Astrid.
I'm actually was flagged down by Sil Turnbloom, so he asked if I would enter this into the record for him. So pretend I'm Sil Turnbloom on Main Street.
But you're really Nancy Smith.
Right, but I will also speak separately. So for Sil, he wanted to pass on that this would cause a little bit of frustration for him. He lives and he felt he would be directly affected by it. He owns the property just south, as well as the home south of that property. And his concern is mainly that we have a general plan in place with the table of uses. And he doesn't like seeing those uses changed with every whim. In fact, he used the word lightly changed without major consideration and input and major reasons as to why those uses are changed. They don't have the time to come down and redebate it, rediscuss it. He would be here if he could, but out of respect to the residents, he just feels that anytime we make a change in the table of uses, it should be a major process. So, Nancy Smith, Centerville. I share some of the same concerns. I heard tonight that Main Street is dilapidating, and we know that, but I take issue with the fact that we need to open up the table of uses. I think maybe we need to go in and look at some of the restrictions first that have been placed on Main Street. I mean, who in their right mind would come to Main Street if they're not able to remodel a building, because we've made the buildings non-conforming? And unless they're willing to move to the street and create this overlay zone, they're not allowed to do it. So much of what any business would want to do is restricted. The other concern that I have is maybe the approach that we've taken for the past 10 years is wrong. We have identified that Main Street is a unique street, and we've actually stated in the 2007 study that it is a more sensitive street, and in fact, let me just read it. A more sensitive street than our other commercial strips. Due to the close proximity of single-family homes, it is critical to maintain a high standard of appropriate and compatible uses along Main Street. And then if you go to the zoning purpose that talks about the CM zone, this zone is intended to promote a combination of retail and service facilities that meet day-to-day needs of nearby residents, which are compatible to the character of the adjacent area. So it's an either-or situation. We can't have it both ways. We can't say that single-family home is compatible next to uses that aren't compatible. We can't pretend that Main Street is a more sensitive street, that we want it to be different, and then allow the same uses on Main Street that we allow everywhere else in the city. So I'm questioning if the approach that maybe for the past 10 years we should have been making is whatever is allowed on Main Street is allowed on Main Street and shouldn't be allowed anywhere else, or should only be conditional everywhere else. We have scrapbooking companies, we have Xerox places, we have all sorts of commercial medium uses in the industrial park. For heaven's sakes, why aren't they on Main Street? Well, because we've allowed it anywhere else in the city. And so I am looking for leadership that is going to say, we believe in a plan, but you're going to cause it to happen. So maybe before we go in and we jeopardize and weaken what we have said, maybe we need to just relook at and find the tools to cause it to happen. I would look to you and suggest that if the pendulum swings too far, are we swinging it too far again by opening it up and making Main Street a Parish Lane or a Pages Lane or any other street when we have things that say it should be different? And those were part of the guiding principles for the mixed-use overlay. And so in regards to that, I just think that it would be premature to make a change until we, as a citizenry, know what direction you're going. We've heard that you're talking about doing away with the overlay. We've heard that you're talking about lifting some of the restrictions. We've heard that you're talking about changing maybe form-based to a different type of zoning. Maybe you owe it to the citizens to get that in place first before we start amending the table of uses, so that you don't go down another road that limits and that actually directly is in opposition to what I believe the past 17 years has been. I appreciate the hard decisions that you make. But that's the leadership I'm looking for, is, you know, if we believe in something, stick to it, and let's find the tools to cause it to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nancy.
Jennifer Trimblin, Centerville, Sill's daughter. We had 4 great grandbabies at our house all day, so he's home in bed. But I kind of find this ironic that we're discussing something about Main Street again.
Just back away a little bit from it. Okay.
There we go. The same night we're considering maybe a hotel being down on the west side. That would seem to just further kill the commercial viability of Main Street. And I also find it really ironic that their restaurants and small little eateries aren't allowed on Main Street when they're the only ones on Main Street doing any business. I've lived here my whole life in that little house across the street from Cutler's. Every time something goes in this building that's being proposed, the 5-year lease is up and they're gone. And it sits empty, and it sits empty, and it sits empty. So kind of my point, I guess, is I don't have any, I mean, catering limited is probably one of the more desirable things for Main Street, in the fact that if it stays small, but I think it opens up the whole situation is, does it stay small? Does it stay with this one little establishment that just has 1 or 2 food trucks coming in? Or does it open up to something bigger that wants, 4 or 5 trucks for every event they're catering? And so it's just kind of back to the same thing where we have to decide which neighbor we're going to help. Are we going to help the neighbors that live in this area? Or are we going to help the neighbors that own the properties? Because I know them all. I know the people that own the property that they're trying to lease. I've known their family since I was a little girl. And so it's just frustrating to me that we have to come back every so often and say, which neighbor are we going to defend? Because that's what it's been down to lately. And I know kind of my home being in this commercial district, because it got changed on us, on my family with no regard. It was a resident all the time my family owned it. It's a little frustrating to me because I'm thinking, well, it's a commercial, so if I want to build a house and be with my family on our property we've had for 75 years, I can't. But anybody else can come in and say, we want this kind of business, give it to us. And that's kind of where my frustration really lies, because I'm down here defending my home every few months because of what's going on about Centerville Main Street. And I feel bad that my neighbors move in thinking they're going to come into a nice place and have them having to come and defend their homes too. And I guess that's where it gets me most of the time about anything that needs the changes that arise. Not necessarily the change itself, but the fact that it's so often that it comes up. Thank you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else who would like to speak at the public hearing? If not, we give the applicant an opportunity to respond to any of those. And I wanted to clarify, my understanding is that single-family homes are an allowed use if along that Main Street. If somebody wanted to build a new home, that would be an allowed use.
So a couple things just to maybe address so that we feel a little bit more, so we all feel comfortable. The nice thing about this particular location is that there's 2 access points. So there's an access point from the south and then also one from Main Street. The particular truck that you were talking about, it was delivering equipment, not food. Right. So food service vehicle, those would be smaller. And those we can set up rules for them, a couple of rules. One, which access point to go into and leave from. Yeah. And we can also set up what's called key lock, which is we can set up whenever we want them to deliver. In fact, let's say that we wanted them to deliver at 4 a.m. or 3 a.m. And so they would just have a key to the building, they come in, they drop it off, they leave. So let's say that we wanted them to deliver, they can deliver during the day at the busiest time. So we can work out whatever's best, but access points, I don't know if that's a huge issue. And then in terms of timing on when deliveries come and go, we can make adjustments for that as well. One thing to note is that whatever we do is surely a lot less than opening up to the public, which has been proposed. That's really going to cause a lot of traffic. And so, what do we really want? But we can make it work kind of either way.
Can you clarify one thing? You said that a truck has arrived and delivered equipment to that location already?
Yeah. So there's some equipment that we've had delivered there that's for trucks. What happened with this space is that it was Jade Hill before, so myself and the owner had no idea that this was going to be an issue. So I've signed a lease. And started having things delivered there. So basically the long and short is, if you say no, I'm out a bunch of money, but whatever, it's up to you guys. So we eventually found out, oh, wait a minute, this type of use isn't currently allowed on Main Street, so we've stopped.
Did that happen at the business license permit process, or just curious how you found out?
Yeah, well, so we started having things delivered, and people were saying, hey, what's going on in there? And so the city just came and said, hey, let's make sure that it's zoned correctly and go from there. And in terms of zoning, to address one other piece, I don't know that I can address it any better than the way that Cassie and Corey have. This is what they do every day. But they said this, staff response, promoting other uses such as catering services and food preparation at this site aligns itself accordingly with the general plan. The plan promotes revitalization and restoration of spaces of this corridor, which would naturally expand the permitted uses in order to attract more businesses other than medical and office. It's a commercial zone. What we do is it's a commercial kitchen, and I think I agree with staff that it aligns with the general plan. And last but not least, in terms of trucks, we said, how do we know it's not going to be, 5 trucks and then 6 trucks? So this particular use is a conditional use, right? Anytime anybody applies for this use, it's for conditional use. And what's the chief condition? It's, well, how many mobiles do you have? What's going to be happening here? So I think that really protects this type of use.
Thank you. At this point, I'll turn it to the council for discussion or for action. You have recommendation from staff to allow the use. You've heard from residents. Do you have any questions for staff or for the applicant?
I do for staff. I'd like to get the staff side of the story on how they discovered this event was taking place, deliveries. Just the other, I like more backstory, if I could get some more backstory.
Sure. So formerly it was Jade Hill, which I believe was a Chinese restaurant, and then it turned into the Water Store. And previously, restaurants used to be a CUP in this zone, but then with the change of the store, the CUP expired. And so that was no longer an acceptable use in that space. And so during the building permit process, we're like, oh, is that a restaurant? You can't have a restaurant. Oh, it's actually not a restaurant. It's catering. We don't have that use. So it was just kind of a mix-up with the expired conditional use permit process from the previous restaurant.
I'm the bad person.
I'm not looking for bad, it's just backstory.
Yeah, backstory was we got a call that there was some remodeling work going on inside the building. They were with their contractor, unaware, first of all, of the land use change that expired the Jade Hill restaurant use, because restaurants are non-conforming, and that expired it. The second is they weren't aware of some of the work required a permit, and so I sent our building official over, and they had a nice conversation with the contractor, and that halted the movement of that process until we went through what you're seeing tonight before you to add this use as we explored, because we had a lot of mixed signals. It was office space with a little bit of kitchen, and no, it's a catering thing, no, it's a restaurant. There was a lot of exploratory work trying to find out, but it initiated because we sent the building inspector over to.
So is there a stop work order in effect right now? Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Any other questions for staff?
So there is work going on about the overlay district. It seems to me that we have the cart and the horse out of sync. Now, obviously, that occurred to some degree by an accidental event. But do we really want to have the cart and the horse out of sync? Do you have any thoughts on that, Cassie?
I do.
Go for it,
have a thought. Cassie can start if you want.
Go for it.
This is the way I described it in a few recent conversations. We're throwing darts. It's the best way to describe it. We're throwing darts. From my opinion, with the construction sales and services, the fire station, the overlay, the success, the density that was watered down, we're throwing the darts. And so at this point in time of the game is we have people all the time that are landowners and management property owners trying to use their facilities. And they come to staff frequently, and in this case, you're not even allowed as they come to staff. And they say, what do we do? This can work for us. The property owner is calling up, we need to be able to do this. The property manager says, what's this? And we can't describe to them what's going to work. So our answer is throw the dart and see what sticks. Now that's an oversimplification. If I offend anybody, I'm sorry. But that's what we're doing at our level, because we don't know if we're going to go down the mixed use, which I was asked today, have you given up on the mixed use, Corey? Yeah, back during the public space plan. Nobody's understood that yet. Yep, I gave up during the public space plan. And so at this point in time, your question about cart and the horse, yeah, you could interpret it that. You could say, hey, we don't know. And staff, you keep throwing these darts at us and making us uncomfortable or comfortable depending on what it is. So you need, vision. Staff's view is we're using your existing policies the best way we can to give the guidance to the individuals that come in and ask for a need. And when we think of it as a CM zone, we think of it as a service sector zone and professional services, and it's still struggling because the 85 plan said we need to do something. Main Streets never really came together. It kind of started and then it's floundered. Revitalization. The first attempt was 2007. We know what that first attempt has resulted to be. And so we're still here asking what CM is. And from our standpoint as planners, it's back to the discussion. If you're going to leave it commercial, what's going to work? And it's not retail from our standpoint. Now, retail can come. Retail's joined at the hip in that specialty lifestyle place. It's not your CVS for this area. So it's going to come. Park City, we went to a conference to. Their struggles up there are so drastically foreign to the rest of us down here on the Wasatch Front. It's unbelievable. But here's what Park City does really, really, really well, and they're fortunate to do it, just like Springdale and Gateway to Zions. They're fortunate to have this identity. But the identity is so strong that they say, you can't come here as a business unless you do X, Y, and Z. And businesses clamor to get to that point because of that identity. Now, as you have the microbreweries and you have the parties for the Sundance Festival and you have the late night activities going on with the skiing and the mountain bike in the summertime, there's residents sitting right behind that main street, exactly behind that main street. And don't think Park City doesn't get complaints. But here's Park City's view of it. We know. We're going to do our best to try to balance your needs. But we're Park City. Welcome to what we are. That's over strong, but that's what Main Street is. What are we and where are we going?
We've struggled with that. We've said if you're a dentist office, you're welcome. If you're not,
not welcome. And I don't know. I don't know the answer. So we're just going off existing policy, commercial zoning, and the types of uses that may be successful there. But cart before the horse, good comment. Mitigating impacts during the CUP. The debate tonight, all actually very good and wonderful to hear.
The other wasn't an endorsement from Park City, right? That was just you.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wanted to make sure the conference and the Park City were not.
Yeah. Park City's a weird place into itself.
Now you just undid all the welcome.
So, Council, what would you like to do?
Oh, I was looking for counterpoint or additional.
Oh, did you want to comment, Cassie?
How could
He
you
didn't
beat
take it
that
all, did he?
tangent? I think just to summarize that I think we can all agree that we want something different to happen on Main Street. I think it's a good idea to open up the table of uses. The main concerns that I've heard here tonight are that the traffic and the loading and the unloading might be an issue. I think those things can be mitigated with the limited definition and the CUP. Both of those things are designed to mitigate those exact issues, and that's why we made it a CUP and not a permitted use. And then on the other side, if you want a more locally serviced business or a walkable business in this area, if that's what you want Main Street to be, then let them be a restaurant too. I think that's what I'm hearing, is that maybe we did want the food too, as well as the catering or the traffic. So I think both of those things, like all of the concerns that I'm hearing tonight, I don't see a good reason to deny it, because we can either be mitigated or it's only going to push us in the direction that we want to go.
My concern is the same as Bill's. I think we're putting the cart before the horse. And I feel bad because I've had some of my worries alleviated by listening to him. But on the other hand, we're opening it up not just to him. So I think we need to decide what we want on our main street before we start throwing more darts in there that won't mix in with. I mean, so he's saying he's not going to have a lot of smells, but if we open this up, we can have the guy with the barbecue down there. And we've put the dentists down there, who are our mainstays of Main Street, so now we're going to put a barbecue shop right next to them, so they've got that constantly. Or you've got a lot of hair salons down there.
A lot of sugar in barbecue, they might appreciate it.
Yeah. And so then you've got the hair salons. Are they going to be right next door to? I just think we need to look at this holistically and make sure that whatever we decide we want on our main street, they're all going to be able to coexist. And I think picking this one out of here because we want it for this one person, this one place, but we have to open it up for all of Main Street. And that's my concern, is I think we need to decide what we want on all of our Main Street and maybe open up some and add some more uses, but we need to make sure that all of our uses are going to go together. Are we going to have residential? Well, I don't think residential is going to go very well next to, certain places. I mean, we're not saying that they can't vent their smells outside, so it could be. And that's my concern, is that we are opening it up to all of Main Street, and I think we need to decide.
You're always going to have residential next to some part of commercial. There's always going to be a
That's right,
a
but that's
connection.
why I'm saying we need to look at it and figure out what we want on there and make sure that all these things are going to coexist. If we put this on here, how many of our other uses that we already want on there is not this exact use, but what it would allow is it going to coincide with the other uses that we want on our main street? I think we just have to decide what we want there.
I think too, and Nancy brought up this point, and I wrote it down, is Main Street unique? I mean, that's a base definition. You have to say yes or no. If it isn't, then your table of uses doesn't really matter, does it? You could put anything that's CM compatible in there. If it is unique, then what does that uniqueness entail? And I understand from the leasee and the property owner's perspective, their goal is to try and make it work with whatever facility they have. And to the point of every 5 years they're coming back. That means that whatever they've been doing to this point has not been either A, successful, viable as a business, or it's not compatible with the area that it's trying to operate in. So I see that side as well. But 6 months from now, if a mountain bike trail, I'm not telegraphing anything, I'm saying if a mountain bike trail were up on the hill, what's the possibilities there could be a specialty mountain bike shop sitting in that same location? Who knows? And maybe that would be a viable use or not. I'm saying from that perspective, it is cart and horse in so much as that, is it unique? I mean, there's a lot of people who put a lot of work into saying it is, but is it really? I'm not going to answer that tonight.
And if we do look at the overlay, then it would make a lot more options that we could. I mean, right now they're so handicapped on what we can put in these buildings because they can't remodel. They have to move to the sidewalk if they remodel. And obviously it's really hard to pick your building up and move it to the sidewalk. So if we release some of those restrictions, we may be able to get more and different.
So I understand the desire for holistic, but in my mind, I can easily separate the kinds of uses to the type of building or the design standards. And your overlay has to do a lot with the design standards. But if you've turned down a couple of uses so far that would, the contractors, and if you turn this down too,
we need to
the
get
business
together.
community
We need
gets
to get.
gets frustrated.
We need to get it done. We need to decide what we want on our main street, and get this done. And I feel like we're hurting people because we're not getting it done as quickly as we need to.
You're never going to find something that makes everybody happy. You just have to decide: are we open for business? Are we encouraging the business, or do we?
So I have some thoughts. This is one of those fun decisions where I came completely undecided. And I love that because then you're really letting the process go to work and hearing everyone's concerns and hearing the applicant's point of view. But the things that came to mind to me are, initially you could tell my gut thought was, well, how is Main Street unique? Main Street should be our neighborhood place, right? So it should be servicing the local people, and Nancy brought that up. In the ordinance, it's written that way, that we should be serving the needs of the local community. But there's another Main Street definition, and that is the Main Street versus Wall Street. And that we need a place in America where the little man can succeed and survive. And, the bulk of our business economy in our nation is the small business. And so if it isn't in our Main Street where we can support the success of that kind of business, where else would it be? The biggest question, I do understand my fellow council members' point about cart before the horse, but I'm questioning use right now on Main Street, and no matter how we design the buildings and the restrictions that we put on as far as remodeling and all of that, I'm asking myself right now, is this a use that fits this area? And I've been convinced that it is. And one of the major measuring sticks that I'm using is considering the existing uses that we allow. Is there any evidence at all that this would have a greater negative impact than any of those uses, right? So his point that I'm saying maybe I want more access to the public, I want them to be able to come eat the food, but then with that comes the con of higher levels of traffic, right? And so every choice that you're going to make is going to have a list of pros and cons, and I just don't see here that there's a list of cons long enough that overwhelms that it's any longer than anything we already allow there. And so I would like to encourage the support of local businesses. I would like to encourage the success of our Main Street rather than continued dilapidation, because we have a habit of saying no to pretty much everything that comes before us. So I would be in support of adding this new use to the use list.
Anybody else? I'll remind you, we've got 2 more public hearings tonight.
So along those lines, I will go ahead and make a motion to approve ordinance number 2017-27, amending various sections of the zoning code, including CZC 1212-040 regarding definitions and table of uses to add catering limited.
Is there a second to that motion?
I'm not going to second it, although I am sympathetic to it, because I have taken a pretty strong stand that I was not going to vote, or not willing to vote at the conclusion of a public hearing because of what it telegraphs to people. So, Tammy, I would, but not tonight.
Anyone else willing to second that? If not, I'll rule that dies for lack of a second.
I would move that we table this for 2 weeks. I'd like to have the 3 weeks, beg your pardon, thank you, Steve, till the next city council meeting. I have some concerns that I expressed. I am actually very sympathetic with what Tammy is expressing. I'm very sympathetic to the business owner. But I believe from past experience it is a mistake to vote on these as we finish public hearing.
I'll second that motion, and it is for the exact same reason. We take more flack from the public as you came in pre-decided if you are voting the same night as a public hearing. It gives no time for consideration, and so that's why I second that motion.
Further discussion on the motion? All those in favor of the motion?
Aye. Aye.
Any opposed to the motion? That appears to pass unanimously.
But we're tabling specifically to next meeting.
To the next meeting. Yeah.
Which the next meeting, the date of the next meeting, Steve, is November?
It's actually Wednesday, November 8th, because of the election on Tuesday.
And I'll allow a question from a
We're
question.
killing you.
Do you have a question, or you just want to comment? Because
if you're going to comment, come up to the mic.
So one really nice thing about this that addresses the cart before the horse argument is that it's conditional use, right? You guys set the conditions for every catering limited that comes before you. You set the conditions. Here's where you can do it. So you guys have 100% control.
I would agree with you, except for past conditional use has led to enforcement problems where a business owner will agree, and I'm not going to name any businesses, but they agree to conditional use, and then they violate the conditional use on enough of a regular basis to where the city has to do enforcement actions on the business and babysit them. So this is nothing to do with you as an individual. This is just a pattern that has been repeated with conditional use. It's conditional if everyone plays nicely, but sometimes businesses say, I'm desperate, I have to operate beyond my normal hours of operation. All kinds of conditions come out that are outside the conditional use. That's just the realities.
I see. It sounds like an enforcement issue, not, you know, a zone text amendment issue, but I get it. So
Mr. Hatch, thank you for the material and for coming and being patient with us.
We'll
in the process.
see you again in 3 weeks.
And we do apologize for the delay, which I understand hurts you, but we've been censured too many times.
Thank you. Next up, we have more fun. We have a public hearing on a zoning code amendment for density gradation in the residential medium zone, which is another amendment to the zoning code. And Cassie, you had a perfect record coming into this, so.
We're just tabling.
We're just tabling. We'll turn this to Corey Schneider, our Community Development Director, for discussion or for a staff report.
Let's see if I can not make it tonight, talking to you all night long.
Please.
I know you'd enjoy that. Here we are, gradation. I've been hit up in the past on the gradation, or what do they call it, granulation versus gradation. And I use granulation because that's my favorite word because it's different than gradation and get in trouble for it. That's a hit on Cassie. She's chewed me out almost every day I use that word. You asked us, as a result of a petition before you, particularly the Dave Bell property, to look at how we manage the RM in particular. It'll extend a little bit broader. I'll explain it along the way. I have this PowerPoint so that you can, it's really, other than the map I'll show you at the end, all of it is within the text of your proposal. So there's really shouldn't be any new information other than the map at the end explaining a question. But on the residential medium, the second slide, slide number 2. This is existing provisions. It's trying to summarize it. In your general plan, low density is up to 4 units an acre, and in your general plan, medium density is 5 to 8. I think what has confused the commission earlier when we talked about 4 units an acre, 6 units, 8 units an acre, is your zoning ordinance, the RM, it actually doesn't start at 5. The permitted use starts at 4. And so that's something I think the Planning Commission didn't understand, is they're thinking, hey, Corey, you should be talking about 5 to 8. And that's what our residential medium is. It really starts in 4 under the zoning ordinance. Don't know why that's structured in 2003 that way, but what is structured with 4 units an acre in the medium, even though that's the same density of the RL, is the permitted use. So any RM zone, you start out at 4 units an acre. The 5 to 8 that you find in the general plan is the conditional use range. And so it's 5 to 8 to get through a conditional use. And so your 4 is permitted, 5 to 8, that's medium, slides into the conditional use process as a range. As the 2 check marks are trying to tell you, what's the default request on a 5 to 8 range? 8. That's why you've requested some further discussion about the RM. The other thing that's always on the debate, what is a CUP? CUP is not a process to deny or to start out at a denial and see if you're comfortable. State law has made that very clear in the last few years. CUP is like a permitted use, but it allows you an extra level of scrutiny. That extra level of scrutiny is mitigation. If the 5 to 8 or the request for 8 comes in, you scrutinize the traffic, other impacts, odors, noise, everything you're talking about previously. And if you can mitigate those, then state law is saying you have to approve it. And it can be overturned if you try to deny it. You actually have to have substantial reason to say no. And so that's been the tough part about that range issue, is how do you tell somebody 8 yes, 7, or 8 no, 7 yes. It's very difficult. It's handcuffed everybody in the review process. Except for, no pun to the developers, I know they're here, if they get 8, it's not handcuffing them. They're handcuffed because they got 8, because they wanted 24. Anyhow, next slide. So what we've done in the proposal is we've taken that 5 to 8. So we're still saying 4 is permitted. And we're calling that a tier 1. I'll explain the tier 1. But we're taking the 5 to 8 range, and yes, the general plan says RM is 5 to 8, but staff chose not to try to do 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8. It became problematic of trying to determine how you can have justifiable criteria in your CUP review or your standards that distinguishes a 7 from an 8 unit. And so we split it up into 6 and 8. So now the range disappears. We go to the tier system. Tier 1 is 4, the permitted tier. There's 2 conditional use tiers. That's a 6 tier and an 8 tier. So, and I'll explain why at the end, why we did not go to zoning districts. We went to just taking the CUP and creating 2 tiers within that CUP. Next slide. So the density tier 1. This is your permitted use. It's 4 units an acre, very similar to your 4 units an acre of an RL. And so if you don't want to go through the CUP process, or in the case of the new provisions, you can't qualify to the CUP process, you at least get 4. That keeps that use alive. It keeps the base reason for you have some rights to that medium density, but it will be at a 4. So instead of constructing 4 individual homes, you could construct a 4-plex in that tier. Or you could do 4 homes, because we're actually amending provisions to bring back single family as an opportunity in that lower tier area, so that somebody could do smaller lots and cluster it or whatever they want to do. We can confess to the commission it's looking at infill, the opportunity later down the road. If we're using this zoning tool, if we find areas where a tier 1 RM could exist, we could call that out into the general plan and use it as an infill. And so I'm setting up the structure for potential uses in the future. But ultimately, the tier 1 is 4 units an acre. The idea is that you're substantially in a single family zone. That's the criteria to look at. It's served by a local or minor street. So you're not on the major streets. You're on these local and minor collector streets, basically residential neighborhood type streets. Adjacent to or substantially surrounded by the lower density of the RL, where we expect light to moderate traffic, because if you're 4 units in an RL, 4 units in an RM is not going to change the traffic pattern. That's a low expectations of the traffic. It uses transitional buffer to higher density zone. This is going back to the whole debate on 100 East and the RM zone buffering the city hall. We're maintaining the opportunity. Whether this is a tier 1, in my mind, 100 East would be a tier 1 as you apply the criteria. So it wouldn't be an 8 zone, it would be a 4 zone, because it's a local street and it's buffering just a civic use, a public facility zone. And it is primarily to buffer single-family neighborhoods to what's happening surrounding that single-family neighborhood. Here is the expectation, and this is the part I told the Planning Commission, how strong do you want this language? It's willing to go all the way to the shall. So it's not using a shall, but I think that's something you have to consider. Do you want to move it to a shall? I would, but I think that's something
you mean this red that says
the check mark below this one?
Such densities shall be applied?
No, the medium density single family homes we would add in, that's your shall. You have to build it this way.
Okay.
Have to build it this way. But the tier 4, the build it is Reintroducing single-family homes. Single-family homes right now are conditional use permits in the RM zone. I have no idea why, unless you're just trying to preserve people from doing single-family homes. So you can do fourplexes. That doesn't make sense to me, and the debate in the last 10 years still doesn't make sense to me. So let's reintroduce single-family. If somebody by chance really wants to do a single-family in an RM zone, why are we getting in their way? Let them go for it. So reintroduce single-family back into it. Twin home lots. Twin home lots is where instead of creating a duplex, this is the problem with creating a duplex subdivision, is that because it ends up being an investment property and a rental, we're not trying to distinguish that the renters are bad and owners are good, but the complaint is when you build a duplex, it often ends up in a rental place over time. And so a twin home is taking that duplex, putting the firewall in between and creating two lots. So it's a way to cluster the density, but still put it on individual lots by connecting a common wall. That's a twin home. We don't allow twin homes, but we allow zero lot line, which is nearly a twin home. It's just you're putting the side yards combined to side yards, and you get this odd kind of pattern developing. And that's the Pioneer single-family homes. Most of those are on a zero lot line. So we're saying it's single-family homes, your twin home lots, or even a triplex, because you're up to 4 units. Why can't you add a triplex into there, or zero lot line? And this is compatible with a single-family neighborhood. So I think that's something to think about, is how strong should this style be in your code? I think it should be pretty strong, if you're willing to commit to that. Telling people that this is the style development. You're going to be on a local residential road. It'll just be twin home lots on a corner area where you have a collector and a local street. Maybe that could be an RM zone on a tier 1 level, and you can build a duplex on that corner, but it's still no more than 4 units an acre.
So, can I interrupt?
Sure.
Four units an acre, 2 units half acre. Twin home lot.
Still the same density, but now you can combine them together.
I don't think I've ever seen that built anyplace.
It was the way zoning took duplex subdivisions and moved them into individual ownership. Each unit could be moved to individual
Yeah, but you're
ownership.
talking twin home on a quarter acre lot. I've never
You're
seen.
you're talking about your density is 4 units an acre. You apply it in a format that you want. You could do it as a twin home, you could do it as a single family, you could do it as...
So maybe like the Bamberger development, which is here behind Huffaker Dental, you have homes that are together, but there's more open space. It's a little bit, it's more dense than 4 units.
That one's an 8.
But you could put it...
So what you're saying is that you're blending, you've got some twin homes and some fourplexes.
Depending on your size of your lot and the area that you're in, yeah. As you'll
Well, but
see,
again, 4 per acre says quarter
per
acre
acre.
lot.
Yeah.
Now, obviously, the street and other goes into that calculation,
Correct.
so it's a little less, but.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just a format, the presentation of the format of the density. The tier 2, this is their 6 unit. Their tier 2 is moving it and bumping it out of a local street area and moving it to your major collector and minor arterial. So now we're moving out of, theoretically, we're moving out of the single family neighborhood and moving closer to other intensity zones, higher traffic places. We're going to bump up that density to the 6. This is transitional to the higher buffers of the public facility, commercial medium, CH zones. Used in areas where groundwater, this is something called out in your general plan about multifamily. When you're using multifamily, you're supposed to apply it to lands that can't have basements. Patio homes work. My guess is the format of the old general plan is that we love our basements. And if you can't have a basement, I don't want to build a single family home there. So we move to the multifamily. But that's actually in your general plan is RMs to be used in areas where groundwater is high. But you can still do a patio home, but maybe the patio homes are undesirable because you can't have a basement. So I just use that policy and that language out of your general plan. Development style, think of the Hofoka property, not the density. Think of the Hofoka, the Brighton project that created a consternation. The design pattern of that was purposeful. we'll have later discussions about roads and widths and so forth and all the things, but the design pattern was not to allow that multifamily allowed, because they're 7.75, I think that is what their density, and turn it into stacked flats and parking lots. I think that would have been disastrous for that neighborhood. And so why I push so hard for the density is because I pushed the developer without design guidelines so hard to create a local street. That local street became controversial, and the sidewalk about it became controversial. But could you imagine taking that same amount of density and taking the 12 plexes in Pioneer and plopping it on the Hofoka property with carports? What would that have made that neighborhood look like? So regardless of the density and the tensions about the road widths, that design is better because it is a townhome style development. And so the development style pattern, that's what we're saying. You're not up into the areas where parking lots go in and stacking the units. You're still in the townhome, you just get more density. And oh, by the way, whether it's a public street you're dedicating or a private street that you're developing with the standards now that we didn't have in the past, it has to be a street. Has to have that neighborhood street appeal even at a 6. It's just now at a higher density. And then the next slide to the tier 3. This is your 8. This is bumping up the road. Not very many areas in our city that actually qualify under this standard, to be honest with you. But you're looking at your major arterials, your frontage road, your freeways. You're looking at the larger capacity streets defined, and this is all defined. We call out what our major streets are in Centerville in our general plan. So Porter Lane, that is a major collector. It's not even an arterial. So my opinion, Porter Lane is really the tier 6, or the 6 units, a tier 2.
So under this definition, where would you see this tier 3 being allowed? Along Pages Lane?
Main Street?
Main Street, yeah.
Yeah, I think Main Street is an arterial. But something off a major street, frontage road, Main Street, something where you have a high volume of traffic, but you're not in the middle of a single-family neighborhood. You're over in the areas where the lower densities are not as compatible as the higher density because of the intensity use. And I don't think there's a lot of areas when you look at the map that qualify for this. But again, it's trying to take a tool and justify the tool and then look at how it may play out in Centerville. So that's the tier 3. Now you're looking at, you can do the other stuff if you really like it, maybe, but this is where we'll have the parking lots and the carports. And so this is the stuff regardless of the density that's not RM out onto the legacy area, you're looking at the stacking of the flats, the parking lots, and the carport design.
Is it typical to have, usually that type of density is only when it's much higher than 8 units per acre.
Now you're in the philosophical issue of how does Centerville like density?
Yeah. I guess you could still theoretically do stacked flats.
Yeah, the stacked flats in A3 is, Pioneer is a PDO, so it's 8.5 units per acre in its mix. So you have the single family, the townhome, and the stacked flats.
The stacked flats are much denser.
And stacked flat density is much denser because it's rebalanced by the single family.
I think the mayor's point is something that I also wonder about, that if you were doing it in the stacked flat style, but you still had 8 units per acre, then that would most likely be not the best use of the space, unless you wanted a large open space.
That's a yes and a no. It depends on your developer and their wants and what market they're trying to hit.
But we could consider changing that language there and saying 8 units and an acre and under don't need to be in that style.
You can change, this is your ordinance. You can change it any way you desire.
But I want your reasoning behind why you put that in there.
Because I'm just looking at your RM zone and the types of units that got built in the RM zoning.
Can you think of
Can you think of examples?
The Pioneer is is a PDO, but those aren't really RM. They're really RH, the stacked flats portion of it.
Right, when you calculate the density.
And the townhomes are more RM.
Yeah, and again, it's just what's the configuration of the property, what's the access to the property, what do I think the market's going to be, am I trying to establish some rental units, am I trying to hit a townhome market? it's hard to create a tool and predict how it all be used. And again, people will probably come in as they normally do. Oh, this doesn't quite fit. Will you rethink it this way? But I am just trying to say, what are the patterns out there and when would we apply them? And I think parking lot design should be in a different look and appeal if it gets used. Then the next slide, design and development standards. I'll let you pour through them, but this is the first time we're putting in architecture to the residential units. And I'm stealing pretty common language that we use about residential in our model ordinances along the Legacy Parkway that we adopted back into our Shorelands Commerce Park. We're saying that you're coming in here and it has to have an architect design to it. We want some design eye. So when you're going to the multifamily and you're getting those densities, and we debate what is high, low, and medium all the time around here, but when you're going to a place that has that, we want an architect involved. We want some design eye involved into it because that helps buffer the tension with the public in the design, the developer and what their costs are, and the creative thinking of an architect to at least consider all of the policies as a neutral party and try to make a win for a developer as well as the city. And unfortunately, in our day and age, architects, engineers, and these professionals are our greatest assets to be used as mediating these kind of things. It's the old days of building your own home, and whether the wind blows it over or not is your choice or long gone. So, except for Howell in Box Elder County, I think the building inspector gets to the edge of Brigham City, looks out across the West Desert and says, building looks good, and passes it off and goes back.
Can you talk to just a minute about that as far as the language that says permit shall bear the architect stamp for the state of Utah? Can you explain how what sort of restriction that is, or?
They have to, when you're using an architect under the DOPL or the Department of Professional Licensing, an architect can't operate in Utah without that licensure. So we're trying to meet the state requirement that anytime an architect, you don't have a pseudo-architect coming in and drawing up plans. It's a protected profession.
So a architect who's licensed in, say, California does a design, they must relicense in Utah before that's acceptable as an architect's drawing?
Yeah, you'll end up, if it's an outside engineer, they'll get a local engineer and stamp that in there.
Is that common?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, typically there's no reason why you have to be local versus.
That's why I'm asking, because if I'm
I think we checked, but
architect,
I think state law requires it. Lisa can maybe research that for you, but I think under the licensing, there's protocols for operating as an engineer and an architect in the state of Utah.
Okay.
And we want to be respectful of that. The other thing, there's a lot of, I call it fluff language. It's important language, but it is the fluff language. It is trying to go in and say, first of all, you have to come in with a theme. It's not a hodgepodge. We want some design standards to mitigate massing of buildings, because if you get a big apartment building, and that's relative, the massing, and this is where planners are never believed, but it's not density, it's design in the details. And density is a component, but really, most often when people complain, it's about the design. I mean, even the HFOCA, they didn't like the narrow roads and didn't like the sidewalk and didn't like the open space. That was primary, everything, most of their motivation. Nobody really said, I really don't like that roof pitch, so you might get that. There's interesting designs out there by architects. But they were really looking at the layout design and the theme, and that's their complaint, as they think about the density and how it looks and how it integrates with the neighborhood, and where's the buffers and where's the open space, where's the neighborhood look and appeal. And so we think, the building mass adds to that use of exterior materials, your landscaping that's involved in there. We do a heavy amount of landscaping of non-single family development in our ordinances, so we're primarily heading over to that ordinance and taking that in. That's the 40% and the 60%. We add in the street standards. We increase them from what HFOCA was at the 24. I think it comes in at 28, if I remember, in the standards, because the fire department struggles not with providing service on a 24-foot road, but it's the issue of no parking. So now you have the fire code can step in, allow parking on one side of the street. and paint the other curb, or we give an exception. And this case is the first time we're calling out visitor parking for multifamily. We're saying a half a space per unit comes in, and you either provide it on the on-street parking or you provide parking areas in your design for the parking. So I think we began to address some of the concerns about the HFOCA for the design. So that's where we're to date. The Planning Commission reviewed it. Lots of confusion during the Planning Commission debate because we were, is this zone, is this tiers? And I used too many zone words instead of tiers, and everybody was confused. And I was the only one that wasn't confused. So when everybody else is confused and you're not, you know where the problem lies. So it was me. And so once I got the Planning Commission to describe it, they said, staff, go fix it to be that way, send it up to the City Council. So the last slide says, why didn't we go to separate zoning districts? Why didn't we say the conditional use is not at the Planning Commission level, we're doing it by zoning districts for the City Council to apply it? A couple of complex things. First is there's a map there. Other than your Chase Lane Village and what's the green, Jake, what's the one up on the front of Greenfield Acres? I think they're there. I highlighted it in fuchsia because I always quote that to you. What's the fuchsia? That's the closest I could get to fuchsia. But I highlighted the pink, the light pink, and if you zoom back out a little bit, there is our RM zones. And one of the things I think is not well understood is most of our own RM zones are developed. We have very little RM zone that's not developed. We have little smattering pieces. So if you look by City Hall, I don't recall any vacant land on single-family homes right now, so it could be reconverted into an RM, but it is already developed. And if you use the local street in the design idea, that's only a tier 1 opportunity instead of an 8 opportunity if you use the tiers. If you scroll down a little bit, well, this is good enough. Got the fancy pointer here. Here's your HFOCA. Here is your Shayla Park. Both of them are over 6 units an acre. So if you choose to do zoning districts, you're put in a position to take, I don't remember how many properties, there were 600 hits on the zoning map. I don't remember how buildings it was, but it was 32 acres. You're taking 32 acres, and you hear the common complaint, it's the south end of the community, and our prominent area of the RM zone is the south end of the community, and it's the buffering that goes on to the commercial areas. That's how that all arrived. Most of it's all developed. You do have some deep lots of some uses that could be reutilized in that location.
What street is that?
This is Porter Lane. And so you're up on Main Street here, the Florentine Towns. I think Sherry Lindstrom, most of you know where she lives in that area. So you do have some deep lots that could be redeveloped into the RM issue, so it's not like we're absent from the opportunity. But your largest general plan area for RM zone left to develop is 500 west to the frontage road. That's the HFOCA, the Shayla Park, the Bell property. So you see that line is right about there. So you have the backs of these areas technically could be converted to the RM. That's your RM. I checked on Porter. It is a collector street. Given all the criteria, there is some tension in the criteria because you have a very high zone here, but you do have the residential with the house on it. And so the Bell property was your subject of your petition. I look at the standards and see that this is developed. Yeah, it's higher, but this is probably a tier 6. So it is dropping the density if you go to likelihood to the Bell property. But the issue is are you going to take a 7.7 and a 6.5 and rezone them to a 6? Are you ready to host a public hearing and put those developments in a non-conforming status? Another thing I think you have is you'll have to advertise all of these properties and individually assign a density to them no matter what kind of density you apply. And because we have limited area and we can move it into the tier system to handle most of the concerns, I think your public hearings going to every piece of property and deciding what the density is, given that multifamily is a sour spot, is going to create a lot of frustration and consternation in public, unneedful to put into it. So we went the density tier system, that's why we chose it, and I don't know if it's the tool you want, but you said vigorously get it back to us, so we did.
Can we get a copy of your PowerPoint?
Yes, it should be in your Novus agenda.
Well, we will get it attached to
Oh, okay.
Novus, yeah.
All right.
Came in late.
And I can send it to you, too.
So, Corey, speaking of, I agree with your point that trying to legislate each individual piece of property with a specific version of the RM zone becomes challenging.
Could we do it? Yes. I don't want
do
you
it.
to say we can't do it.
So your proposal, I want to be very clear on this because there was some confusion at the Planning Commission. Under your proposal, you leave things that are RM as RM, but somebody has to make that determination, that interpretation, what is RM4, 6, and 8.
Correct.
And under your proposal, is that a staff determination or is that a Planning Commission determination?
Oh, I wish I could have so much authority.
Or is it a City Council determination?
It is a Planning Commission. You're taking the CUP range from 5 to 8, and you're giving new tools and design standards. You have to be comfortable with those expectations. And then the Planning Commission will look at those purpose statements and evaluation, and they'll assign a 6 or an 8 based on those standards.
With a recommendation by staff, but ultimately.
Yeah, staff always participates in a recommendation.
And if City Council doesn't like that, that's the way it's written.
Well, if you adopt this version and you don't like it, then we failed you miserably. But if you adopt this version.
We always like it when we adopt it.
What it is somebody.
It's 10 years later when you find a problem.
10 years, how about 10 weeks?
Yeah.
I mean, it's a combination. You're right. You may not like it in the sense of everybody would like when you feel the pressure to be able to make the decision and mitigate it. But land use planning is intended to be down at the Planning Commission level. It's intended to separate the legislative decisions from the administrative decisions and not get the clamor roped into the legislative decisions, because this is where your biggest lawsuits occur, is when the legislative body can't distinguish between the administrative rights and the legislative rights. And so it's best that you use your Planning Commission and trust that. Now, trust is really fluid. So that's why you have to be comfortable that the standards that are in place that you let them run with are a governing. And if they violate those standards, there's the appellate process to put a check into them. But you do have to be comfortable with the standards and the expectations. And I think with the limited amount that we really have, and, you know, to be honest with you, there are people who are uncomfortable using conditional uses for density altogether. But we already use that, and we're now just pairing it to a more focused and narrow view of when a 6 or an 8 is used, instead of trying to say, okay, I think you're a 5 and I think you're a 7, and I'm being facetious, but now you're opening yourself up to, okay, how did you get to that conclusion? What's your substantial evidence to support those kind of things? And if the zoning, even though judges and courts go with a legislative decision, if you're out to lunch, they can recognize that with your decision.
But we're losing that by giving it up the legislative decision.
To the standards.
We are losing that protection. We have more protection than the Planning Commission does on making
you're
decisions.
saying, I'm comfortable with RM zoning in our city under these standards. That's what you have to say as a legislative body.
That's exactly how land use is supposed to work, is that our job is to set the standard, and then the standard gets applied.
So this matter is scheduled for a public hearing. Any comments, clarifying comments or questions for staff before we open it?
Yeah, I have one. One of my thoughts is rather than 4, 6, and 8, it makes more sense to be 5, 6, and 8.
You want the permitted to be 5? Okay. You want to separate a 4 versus a 5?
It is RM. So I'm asking you to respond to that.
Planning Commission, ditto. About half of them. Why are we doing 4? It took them a while to understand that the general plan said 5, but your zoning ordinance put 4 at the permitted. I argued against some of the planning commission that way because I tried to be forthright to you. We've tried to address infill, and I think that there are opportunities in the future, even though we have limited growth right now with these tools, there's opportunities to look at where we have a major collector or something interface with a local street. Instead of forcing a single family home on that, we could get maybe the twin home or a triplex and disperse the small lot development multifamily in throughout the community. Why do I feel that? We constantly, corruption of college, Councilmember Meekum, people need to integrate with people of their communities, and as they integrate and stay with them, regardless of their income level, they participate in the community. This is why project housing in the large cities failed. They stacked them all up into the high rises and created the inner cities. So I'm setting the tool up for preserving the 4 because that's the same density as the RL, but allowing some flexibility whenever we can get to that point that there are some infill areas that could use it.
Right.
Thank you.
But I think the Planning Commission's point and public hearing first.
Yeah. So let's go ahead and open this for the public hearing. We have very patient public here tonight. Is there anyone else who would like? Is there anyone who would like to speak on this matter? It's a pretty consequential matter.
I actually came just to understand and learn more about it, but a question I do have is, and I think it's heading in a good direction. I think that there's some good things in here. There's a lot to understand and absorb. The question I have is it possible that this could also apply down Main Street and end up being a tool that would be used there? I know it's been rezoned to residential low, but with everything that you're doing and everything that you're looking at and considering, I think that's another reason why it's a good idea to hold off until you know what's happening on Main Street, because if the fire station does move, you end up with a small island piece that actually is going to be hard, I think, to find another viable business. And definitely a single-family home would not be appropriate there, or even a duplex. But I could see possibly this gradation working in an island piece like that that would end up buffering the single-family homes better. So I think that there's, as you look at it, you might want to contemplate and ask yourself if the questions have been answered, if this is a potential tool for Main Street.
Thank you. Anybody else? If not, I'll turn it to the council for discussion. You can discuss it, you could take action, you could table it, given their
propensity to table after a public hearing?
Yes.
That's the motion I'm going to make.
I certainly appreciate Corey putting a lot of time into this and understand it better than the first time I read through the material.
Well, I would propose that we table it until the next regularly scheduled council meeting, because the depth of the text, which was released to the council, Friday, that's a lot to absorb, and there's a lot of shalls in there. Not saying that there's landmines that were deliberately laid one way or another, but I want to make sure that all the shall clauses come out correctly. So I'm going to motion that we table until the next council meeting.
Is there a second to that?
There's a second to that. I'm sorry. There's a second to that, and I would like to say thank you to Corey and the Planning Commission.
Any further discussion on the motion or the issue? All in favor of tabling till the next regularly scheduled meeting?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? All right, we're tabled. 2 down, 1 to go. We thank you for your patience. Next up, we have a public hearing on the PDO zone map amendment and conceptual plan for Legacy Commons. I'd like to start that with a staff report.
Do you want a break now or later?
I'd prefer to keep going, given we have people waiting, but if you,
Okay.
and then take the break right after.
Okay. Jake, do we have the layout?
The elevation.
No, let's see. PDO submittal should have a layout.
The third document.
Okay, that'll work. As you're aware, this came to you several months ago, a little short of a full planning commission review because there was concerns on the developer's position of as a PDO takes a significant amount of time to prepare plans and address it, even though it's a legislative process, and there was some desire on their part to try to measure the temperature of the community that they were in. Ultimately, that made the council uncomfortable, and you instructed them to go back to the Planning Commission and fulfill that request and legislative process with their plan. So here we are tonight with their plan. It's changed significantly, so I think you should be at least aware of that. Over the past few months of them deciding what they would like to do, working with potential users, and then the ever regretful thing is go to the planner and say, hey, what do you think of the plan, and have me push back for several hours on them and make them even more uncomfortable than when they started out. But ultimately, even though it's my role to look at the ordinance reviews and come to you and the Planning Commission with recommendations, I also wear the hat of service to them, particularly when you're looking at a custom zone and trying to speak in behalf of the planning principles that come with the project. And so I get a little more hands-on in a project like this than you would just your typical zoning. I don't want to say that I'm married to the plan, that would be going too far, but I am favorable of the results of the pressures and the discussions that we had, because I would feel uncomfortable, even though I know density is a sensitive issue, particularly mentioned with this project, and particularly with the developer trying to figure out at what density can they achieve so they can look at the different uses. If I just waited for the answer of density and didn't put in the planning principles design, then I would kick myself. So I'm making both of you uncomfortable. I'm making the council uncomfortable with a PDO plan, and I'm making the developer uncomfortable with designing a PDO plan. So therefore, I'm back in neutrality and not married to the plan. Ultimately, it consists of the West Side neighborhood has an allowance of residential in a mixed sector kind of concept. So it's not stranger to see the theater, the Trails project with the Maverick, implementing that in the West Centerville neighborhood plan. Mindful it's 15 units an acre gross, no more than netting out to 25 acres or 25 units an acre net. They're below that. It started out at 120. I think this plan shows 111. And correct me if they've changed those numbers. So since you've seen it, it's dropped by a few units, and mostly I presume to the design and layouts that we talked about together with Spencer, the applicant. But it's a PDO, and I think it's important to the PDO that using the West Centerville plan's policies and what has been implemented, I think we have a pretty good viable product here. And so staff ultimately is supportive of it using the policies and the design principles. If you think of a project, it's in the Parish Lane Design Guidelines. So all of your streetscape, like Fred Hale put across the street on the Trails project, your sidewalks, your street lamps, your landscaping, your berming, all is supposed to be on Parish Lane, and it won't be on in this plan. That's a design change to the project. The reason that's a good thing in the design is we've got a couple advantages. First of all, UDOT has absolutely no intention of putting a sidewalk down their street to lead to the ramp areas. So they have absolutely no intention. How do I know that? Because when we last talked, I talked about access on Parish Lane. I went and met with UDOT. We had a good arm wrestle. Spencer was sitting there laughing, saying, I had the same arm wrestle, I'm just letting you learn as a planner. We had a really serious arm wrestle. I was very honest with them. I challenged their policies on the category of the Parish Lane, how the variances are obtained, how do appeals occur, with that because I think UDOT has mislabeled Parish Lane as a Category 3. I'm convinced of it after all the time I spent. But they say, we don't care. On this part of the ramp area, we're going to stick to the Category 3, and here's we're going to tell you why. We bought the right-of-way access, and we're not going to sell it back to you. So he who holds the land purchase tells you where you're going to go. So I walked out with my tail between my legs and said, there's no access on Parish. So if you have arm wrestling capability of UDOT, feel free to use it, but there's no access on Parish Lane, and they have no intention of putting in the sidewalks and leading to the ramp areas. So we replaced them. Takes the PDO to do that. We replaced them over to the 1250 West. And think of Fred Hale had a south spur. This is the beginning of the north spur. So they'll do something of the alike. We've debated whether it's asphalt or concrete. I think we can still continue to debate that. But this will be, you'll come off the ramp, you can cross the street, go in front of the Maverick, hit the spur at the Burnham Woods. You can come off and just go straight across the street, head up to the north. And now we have an A and we have a B up on the north side over the bridge. Right for grants for the money from the state. We got an A and a B. So I think we can complete this. And so the hopes is that we replace the Parish Lane with the fronting on 1250 West. The concept is that they would like to put a restaurant there. We know the debates of restaurants. I hope I'm wrong. I hope we get a restaurant because everybody wants it. I'm beginning to think that I'll pay them a year's worth of salary to get here. If we can get it here.
We're paying you too much.
They would have a retail shop that's listed as a coffee house. They have a hotel user. This is a major factor in the project. They have that bird in hand according to their statement, and they can share with you to what extent they think that bird in hand is or what they're capable of sharing with you. But the hotel user there, that's a regional use. They provide some local uses and opportunities like the Maverick was across the street. But they do have a hotel. My understanding is there's not conference space. They can clarify that. It would be nice, hint, hint, that you have conference space because we have a lot of Class A office that could use this and you're 15 minutes from the airport. And being 15 minutes from the airport's a good key and gateway into our Shorelands Commerce Park if that wild dream to the north could ever take place. And so I think a hotel use is good here between the two freeway interchanges. I know that there's some discussion about economics of it. I think it's posted lately on your agenda. I don't know what it all involves, but I'll let that. But I do think it adds to the opportunity of the success of our Class A office space in the city in preserving it. Then you have the big concern in the debate is the residential. We went from the style that they had, where it was encompassed all in large buildings surrounded by parking lots. And I think there's maybe a potential design change that I heard in the wings. I won't say the rumor mill because I don't want to get anybody in trouble. But right now, the unit's front along this internal local road, they might swap that so that the parking lot is, their parking lot's buffering to the commercial and use this local road to front it. But our big design discussion was, here's your new streetscape. Like Fred Hale did on the trails for this spur, we're doing the walk-up units along the trail, fronting the street, and having the front yard appeal. So you're just repeating what Fred Hale did, but not on Parish, on 1250 on the spur. We do create, what I really like about this design, and I'd love to take all the credit for design because planners like that, but whoever came up with the idea of trying to frame these internal roads and not just put them as parking lots, I really like that idea. I really like the units that have the front yards to them. And we've tucked all the parking behind, in center and behind, so there's not a big sea of parking lot out into a project. And to answer the question, it's independent parking, nobody's cross-using, everything's being independently supplied. That was a message that I said we better send to the development. So they will be self-sufficient on their own parking for every use.
To that question, 1250, street parking?
Right now, Randy is not recommending on-street parking for 1250 West. We had that discussion with the church. That's not to say that in the future, we have an 80-foot right-of-way there, so that's not to say,
It's pretty wide.
yeah, it's pretty wide. So that's not to say that depending on some design changes, an opportunity for on-street parking, but that's not the position of city staff, is to move to on-street parking right now. So your issue of people using it versus not using it, I think, is something to think about.
Well, I'm looking at the commercial park that just went north that has warehouse space and everything else.
Yeah.
So.
But Randy's not, so right now it's not slated for it. Particularly, it would be easier if we put in some bike lanes, but if we have a multi-purpose trail, I'm not sure there's need for bike lanes. So I think the on-street parking is still a public debate of whether we would post no parking signs there or not. But you know, overall, they combined the open space or common amenities to the project. That's something I pushed Spencer on. It was originally out front in the streetscape. Now the residential units are in the streetscape. And now you have some private spaces with some landscaping buffering the ramp area, and I think that's a good design for the residential uses. So that's a summary of all of the project. We tried to build the approval around this layout and expectations. To be forthright, there is some concerns about this access point and the distance from the corner. We had a serious discussion with Kevin and Randy, and their conclusion is we need to have, the traffic study says it can work. They're not sure they like the methods of the traffic study and the signing of it. So Kevin wants further opportunities to look at, in the final design, whether the full access and how we restripe, or whether we change the lane layouts. But that's the further study to happen. But Kevin sent the message was I think we can come up with a workable plan. So I didn't get that this is a negative and needs to be halted in the process to work it out. It's just engineers getting together and hammering it out on the site plan process. So that, you know, we did line this up across from 500 North. And so what was really interesting is I thought there would be more debate at the Planning Commission. I don't know if we wore them out at the first meeting, but this passed with relatively little debate. So I don't know if we just did an awesome design and layout, or if they were prepped on the last one and were comfortable with it. I have no idea, but there was very little input. They accepted it as proposed to them.
5-0, I believe. Was it 5-0?
Yeah, 5-0. So I'm supportive of it from our planning policy standpoint, and to be honest with you, I think we don't do planning on the economics issues, but I think that the West Neighborhood Plan gives you opportunity to capitalize on the use of, they're providing some park space. They're also providing the park impact fees. I think that's a positive from the project. I do think the hotel adds a component that in between the interchanges, works well and supports the Shoreline Commerce Park. I think the trail access and being able to go for grants gets additional access to our trail system. I know density is a concern. My experience is that Ken Averett was the only one that spoke against the density on the west side at one point in time, but he said he lost that fight. And I have yet to experience in the public process that the density over here is really that problematic to the community. So I think completing a neighborhood is more important, and we get a good benefit from its design.
Thank you for that staff report. Let's hear from the applicant next before we open the public hearing.
Spencer Wright Development Group, 1178 West Legacy Crossing Boulevard in Centerville. Thank you, Mayor and Council, for your time this evening. I think having been here for the past little while, I've gained a greater appreciation for all that you do and the complexities of what you do. So it's been beneficial for me to be here and understand a little bit more about what you do. Just a little bit of background. You've heard a little bit of this before, but just by way of background, the current ownership and status of this property is that we own approximately the eastern 2/3 of the property. It does not include the majority of the frontage. That is owned by the Department of Transportation. And because of that, the property that we purchased from the Savage companies is not a great commercial piece. As we've seen, even though it is zone commercial, as we've seen from the project across the street to the south, they have some pads there on 1250 West, and that's been a little bit more difficult for them to develop. and that's purely a function of traffic counts. There's more traffic on Parish, and so the commercial users, they want to be on Parish, and we can see that through Maverick. But 1250, it's a little bit harder to get commercial there. So our proposal is that we would like to purchase the UDOT parcel, and we have that under contract. In fact, I heard from Daryl Davis today, who's with UDOT, and he asked what was the status, if we were ready to close on it, and I told him that we had this meeting tonight, and he expressed his hope and desire that it would pass tonight and we could move forward and close on the property. If we can do that, that would allow us, our proposal then would be to move all of the commercial up to Parish Lane, which is where it's best suited, and to square off the property. And we think it would create a well-planned, integrated, planned mixed-use development here on this property. With regards to the access, we haven't given up on that. We know it's a hard road, but we have not given up, and we're going to try to exhaust every possibility that we can to get some access on Parish Lane. We feel that the benefits of this proposal, again, is that it would provide better commercial use along Parish Lane, and that is borne fruit. And as Corey mentioned, we have a hotel user who is under contract to purchase 1.75 acres there on the southwest corner of the parcel, and we think that would be a great thing for the city. We think it's a great thing for the community. They're anxious to close. They've been asking us, when are you going to get it approved so we can close? So we're anxious.
This is the Ritz-Carlton, right?
It is not a Ritz-Carlton. Yes, I cannot lie. It is not.
Can you tell us who it is?
I do not have the ability to do that, unfortunately. We have a.
Do they have an external sign with prices that change daily?
They do not.
Okay.
That is, my understanding is that they do not.
20 questions, yes, no.
Yeah. That is a good question.
It dictates the hotel type.
Other uses that have approached us, just based on our sign that's on the property, are veterinary clinics, child care users, other users. So we're cautiously optimistic about the commercial potential there on Parish Lane. Again, we think this would be a better integrated plan development if we were able to purchase the UDOT property and have the PDO put on all 8 acres of the property. The shape of the piece of property that we own right now, it's not a good shape. And if the PDO is not granted and we do not purchase the western parcel that's owned by UDOT, it makes it difficult for that property to be developed as well. I think, again, it makes sense for the city, for the community, for both of these parcels to be developed together. So the question is if we move the commercial to the southern end of the property along Parish Lane, then what do we do with the northern half of the property? As commercial developers, we do not think that the northern half of the property is good commercial property. It does not have good visibility. It's not where the traffic is. And so based on our experience, we don't think that it's a viable commercial use there on the northern half. We talked about industrial. We had a construction company approach us and say, hey, we'd like to build some warehouse here and store our trucks and that kind of thing. So, that's a possibility. I don't think that's the highest and best use. And frankly, that's not what we would prefer. Self-storage is, a possibility here. Again, I'm not sure it's the highest and best use, and I'm not sure that's what the city would like to see there. But that's something that might work. But residential is good for a number of reasons. Number one, because it's good for commercial. The more housetops that Centerville City has west of I-15, that will help the commercial come, and it will help it thrive and stay viable. And so residential housetops are good for commercial. And we know that as commercial developers. That's one of the things that every retailer looks at. They want to know how many housetops are within certain radiuses, within a mile, within 3 miles. They want to know how many residential housetops are there. We have, as Corey mentioned, from the time that we came the first time, we've upgraded the product. The density has gotten less. There's less units on the project than there was before. These units have are primarily served by tuck-under garages, which is similar to the project across the street to the south. They also have those. And we feel really good about this product. It's a product that's been built out of state in Colorado, and we think it's a good-looking, contemporary, kind of higher-end product. Again, just to summarize, if the PDO is not granted, then we would not proceed to purchase the UDOT property, but would, just be stuck trying to figure out what to do with the piece that we own and how we can develop that commercially based on the existing zone. Just in conclusion, there's some economic benefits to the project as well. We hired a consultant, Randy Sant of RS Consultants. He has put together a spreadsheet showing that via sales, franchise, and property taxes that this project would generate over $700,000 to the city over 9 years. That does not include the impact fees that would be generated from the project up front, and based on our own review of city code and ordinances, that would generate over $400,000 to the city up front via impact fees.
That's several types of impact fees, right, Spencer? You're talking about not just
parks.
Not just parks.
That's right. That is park, fire, and storm drain and water.
Right.
Yep, that's exactly right.
And also to clarify, your analysis that we did attach to Novus today, we didn't get it till today, but it added it online.
Thank you.
I think that it did talk about the tax increment generated for the redevelopment agency. You want to get it up there, Jake? Yes, that's the one, I believe. I think it actually understates the property taxes to the city, because you're showing the tax increment of 50% to the RDA from the city's tax levy, but you also have then the other 50% that comes to the city directly that isn't flowing through the RDA.
Oh, interesting. Okay, so you think he's underestimated that?
Well, in the pink area, if you'll scroll it up, Jake. And you
Yeah,
see in the pink area, the Centerville city tax levy, that the RDA is giving up 50% of that city tax levy to the RDA, which of course this board governs, but there's also the other 50% that I don't think is shown in the numbers, is it?
I don't know.
Okay.
I did not catch that, to be honest. I relied on our consultant.
Okay.
All right. So
Thank
that's a good question. I would need to.
And I did have a question, though, about the calculation of the taxable values.
Okay.
The taxable values for the residential portion was after taking the 45% discount, wasn't it? When you show the taxable values, it appears to me that you have taken into account that residential property is valued at 55% of the market values.
I believe that's the case.
That's what I'm guessing from the way the numbers played out there. So
Yeah,
I just wanted to confirm.
That's
Okay.
what it looks like to me as well,
All right.
yes. Okay.
Excuse me for interrupting.
No, no problem. Thank you for your clarification.
This matter is scheduled for a public hearing. Questions from the council before we move to a public hearing? I had one, Spencer, before that I think is relevant for the public hearing. That is, that you have proposed a phasing. You would build the residential first and the commercial second. I have some concerns with that. We had this same issue before, and what happened was that the residential was built, and then when there wasn't an easily found commercial tenant, the developer came back and said, hey, let me put another building in,
Sure.
Look how well residential does and not commercial. And my preference would be to make you do the hard work of finding the commercial tenants, which is often a lot tougher than getting the residential tenants.
Sure, yeah. The phasing that's shown on there is solely a requirement, is solely there because it's a requirement of the city ordinance that we've been instructed by staff that we have to provide a phasing plan. So that's why we do that. Otherwise, we would not do that.
Why did you number the phases the way you did?
Yeah.
I think that's the question.
Yeah, yes, exactly. I think, yeah, the hard part is, again, we have the hotel who's under contract to purchase property, but we cannot control when they actually build. We can't dictate to them. Once we sell them the property, we can sell them the property, but we cannot dictate to them whether they build in 3 months or 3 years. So that's our dilemma, is that we cannot represent that they are going to come in and build anytime soon, because I don't know. I think from what I've been told, they have every desire to get going and to build. But again, that's not something that's within our control. So rather than represent that the commercial would be there, the hotel would be there before we started construction on the residential, we just cannot promise
So
that.
could the hotel decide to not build there and sell the land to someone else?
They could. They absolutely could.
But if there was a PDO, that would be the only thing
It would
allowed.
still be zoned only as a hotel, as part of the PDO plan.
Right, so if it
Do
didn't
do
go
you
in, we
intend to
just have an empty lot
keep
down
the residential portion and be the developer of that, or would you sell that
We would
project
not
to-
sell that.
to
We would
somebody
retain
else?
ownership of that, yes.
And are these, pardon my dumb question, these
There are
are
no dumb
three-story
questions.
residential units?
They're 3-story.
And each one is, so it's a stacked 3 in effect?
Yes, and did you see the elevations by chance? I think
Yeah,
those went up.
I-
Okay.
That's kind of what it said, but I was
Yeah.
having a hard time getting to the 111 count based on your
Okay.
drawing.
Yeah, and the thing that we like about these elevations is they read, frankly, to us more as townhomes. When you look at the elevations, when you look at the frontage, they look more like a walk-up type unit, and that's frankly what we love about it. We think it's a great architectural design. It is not your standard three-story garden-style walk-up apartments. That is not what this is. So we're pretty ecstatic about the.
So you made a comment that
It's in the PDO submittal, Steve.
residential roofs are what drives commercial.
That is
I can see that applying to the restaurant.
Mhm.
I don't so much see that applying to a hotel.
I would completely agree with that. Yeah, I think the hotel, their interest is based more on
Location.
proximity in this specific location. It's based on proximity to the airport and access to to Legacy and I-15. That those individuals who may be going to the airport or other places here locally, they have access to the freeways. But that's exactly right. Yeah, the commercial that I was referring to in terms of demographics, those are retailers. That's who we
That's kinda
mainly
what I
work
thought.
with. Yeah, that's a great point.
So you got this common space that's kind of between the hotel and the western part of the residential.
Okay.
Is that shared common space? So will hotel guests use the pool?
No.
So there's a
Yeah.
wall between, or
Like-
boundary between there?
Yeah.
I
That's what I
believe
kinda
so.
thought.
Okay, yeah, and the hotel does show on their prototypical plan, they do show a pool, their own pool. So I assume they would build that and use that.
There's, this is obviously a conceptual plan, we're not to the details, but
Sure.
I notice there's no sidewalks to get from the hotel to the trail or to the movie theater, to the Maverick, to other places. If we got further in the process, I assume you'd be open to the idea of putting sidewalks in the commercial area as well as the residential area.
Absolutely, yeah, we have absolutely no problem with that at all.
And I think you answered my other question, which was why you didn't match the architectural style of the Legacy apartments or the Fred Hale apartments. You came in with a third architectural style, but that's because you believe that worked for you in another location, or was attractive in another location, rather than trying to match one of the existing themes and continue that theme.
Yeah, that's right. We feel like this is a forward-looking product type. We feel like it's a little bit more contemporary. It's a little bit more of what is going to be in demand going forward in the future. And so we want to stay current, we want to stay relevant. If the city and the council preferred that we matched an architectural style or theme, we don't have a problem with that. We're just trying to put our best foot forward and present what we think is best for the city and its residents and those individuals who would live here.
Thank you. Any other questions before we open the public hearing? Thank you. If not, we'll go ahead and open the public hearing and invite public to speak and comment on this proposed change.
Mark Oligschlager, Centerville. As you know, I'm here for different topics tonight, but as a resident, I can say I'm seeing this for the first time tonight. And in full disclosure, I know Spencer, he's my landlord, but we're otherwise unaffiliated. But I see a plan that I really like. As a former developer, I see a lot of effort going into that with Corey and staff and with a great effort. I think it's unfortunate that there's not a right-in, right-out at a minimum on Parish. And I think to Spencer's point, that greatly compromises the utility. So when you have an odd lot and in a regular shape and you have access issues, I see a developer who's making a great effort to make good use of that property and to have a hotel developer under contract. I'm of the opinion that that's the best hotel site in Centerville, and it makes sense as far as the use is concerned there. And I know that it's a sensitive issue and density is a sensitive issue, but that area works. I work in that area on a daily basis, and I guess I'm mostly concerned about alternative uses that wouldn't. So when I see that much effort going into a project plan to make a site work for commercial use with all of its warts, but knowing, and I'm very well acquainted with the Legacy Trails project. I'm less acquainted with the Garn project, but I followed that Legacy Trails project closely and happen to have the developers as neighbors. And so when I see the demand, I probably feel a little bit differently about appropriate density in certain places where we have this, we have one of the fastest growing populations in the country, and that will continue, and that's an appropriate place for it. The west side is an appropriate place. So I'm seeing the elevations for the first time, and I know we have a long way to go in terms of conceptual, but I would rather not see, and I'm a storage developer in other cities, not here, but I would rather see this than storage. I would rather see this than some sort of industrial. And certainly we could wait and hope that we have high-rise office or something that you might like better, but I think that's probably wishful thinking, and so I would, as a resident and as a citizen, I like this plan. Thanks.
Thanks, Mark. Anyone else willing to share, interested in sharing comments with us? Got the whole Trails Committee here. There is a trail on the front. If there's no one else who would like to comment, I'll close the public hearing and turn it to the council for discussion or action.
In concept, I see some potential there. There are concerns I have. One of those is 1250 and traffic on there. I would like to see that preserved for the commercial corridor that it is. The biggest complaint I get about the movie theaters is when we get into winter and all the cars are pushed up against one side, snows on the other, it slows everybody down, and there's just a lot of heartache with that. So I would prefer that 1250 remain off limits to street parking. In terms of the right-of-way and in and out onto Parish, I'm actually opposed to that, and the reason why is I had a close friend nearly get killed, and if you take almost the same layout and the same proximity to an on-ramp, and almost you couldn't make it more identical. Even though the speed limitation is what it is, people come down over the top of that ramp at much greater than the allowed speed limit. And given the fact that there was no street light to slow them down further enough out in the street, he was nearly killed, and it was the direct result of the way that the access to the road was set up. So where I see a bunch of trees there right now, I would be very in support of that. I would not be in support of having high traffic coming in and out of a hotel or out of a restaurant right onto Parish, given, because I drive that road every single day and I know what people do coming down off of that road.
Go ahead. I feel like I should just record it and just push play, and then you can hear it again. I'm concerned about the density. I know that it is the up-and-coming thing and people need places to live, but we're not adequately staffing our police force in order to add this many people and this many people and this many people. I have a really big concern with that.
My biggest concern is the staging of it, knowing that we may just get the residential and we could have a vacant lot out there or sold to something else that's somebody else is gonna buy it and come in and tell us the only thing they can do is put
More residential.
more residential. That I would feel better if it was that they have to have the commercial before we consider the residential.
That's a concern for me as well. My understanding is through the PDO process, those things can be negotiated, and that the phasing can be a part of the negotiation. Now, you've heard from the developer that there's some challenges with that, but I would say that's, you could enter into investigating a PDO, and if we can agree on that phasing, then makes sense. If not, you don't have to continue that.
Question for Corey then on that. If a PDO was created and it turns out that phase 2 never happens, how easy is it to break up a PDO and resell the land into another purpose? What kind of in perpetuity does a PDO hold?
Permanent, whatever the agreement of the PDO is. It's your contract with the zoning on the approval of the PDO, so they'd have to come back and amend it. Now, that isn't a easy place to be, because if you go out for 5 years and nothing happens and nothing happens and nothing happens, you know, the pressure for change is obviously going to be there, so it's not an easy thing to say, hey, we're going to stick to the old plan. So I don't want to paint it as roses, but it is within your control. The phasing too, I mean, I don't know where you're leaning, and I'm not trying to tip the leaning, but knowing that you usually don't make the decisions at the same time as the hearing, if phasing needs to be a little further detailed, if the traffic needs a little be further detailed, I think we could go back with staff and the developer and roll up our sleeves and see where we can come to, you know, with it, because phasing is a part of a PDO, and you have decision capability in that phasing expectation.
But this is a conceptual, and so if we decide we like the basic idea that we're seeing, then what would the next steps be?
A final site plan based on what you approve.
Right. So
and then a subdivision, because they will divide the hotel lot out from the other lots, and so there'll be 2 lots, a hotel lot, and then the commercial and residential is on their own lot independently. So they're not even phasing out an independent lot for the other commercial at this time, is what I understood.
Robin, does that question I asked to Corey about the PDO and its in perpetuity nature, does that help at all with the phasing or the lack of potential phase 2 at all? Does that clarify it, or is it's all subject to future council's whims when and if there's no phase 2?
Well, it's not all subject, because you can define that phasing before you approve it too.
Mm-hmm. And this council just had to do a PDO amendment for the parking at
yeah, I just don't want you to think that once you approve
right.
it, that future pressures, if things fail, don't change. It does change the nature. I mean, that's what it is. But, you know, if you list the hotel, it's listed as hotel uses, the residential uses, and the commercial is the open-ended commercial. So, you know, that addresses the uses, if you're comfortable with addressing it. The timing and the phasing, you know, I know that it's a little bit hard for them to predict, but I think those are things that we can talk about if you did table it and wanted a greater detailed phasing description. We can add that component in there, see where the lines in the sands are for there. My taking the hat as the city planner and saying this is what the council's asking, and see where we can come to an agreement on the phasing, because other than the hotel, the phasing is just the construction of when they get the users. And obviously residential demand's high, so that will come first. But we could certainly talk about the hotel place, hash out when construction begins with the residential and the hotel, and see if there's wiggle room in the difficult place they're at. I know the rights and the development, and this is not something strange for them to have a conversation with a planner about.
Right, but
I might lose because they're going to bring somebody else, a third person in, and then I can't take on the two. But
You got Cassie to help you.
But it's something we could hash out and come what we think is the best proposal for the phasing, because I sense that the phasing is a 1 and a 2 and the control is a little bit loose for you. We could go back and tighten that up. We can have discussion of the traffic to tighten that up if you want.
But does that need to be tightened in conceptual, or can we approve conceptual and explain that we want that tightened for final?
You can add conditions to have that, but your final site plan, the only thing that comes back to you is the subdivision of the land, the 2 lots.
Okay, that's what I was trying to get clarification.
So we definitely want to just give you our ideas and table this, which we probably would do anyway with it being a public hearing.
I think both the developer and I are waiting very much to say what's your directive. So if you're tabling it, we can go answer the question.
Tangential question that may or may not be directly related. Are moderate income housing requirements, by adding this many rooftops of this type of development, does that complicate or help our situation?
Great question. First one to address is that because of the number of units, the ADA accessible units have to be available on the number. That doesn't necessarily translate to moderate income housing levels. But the question will be is that an approval of a PDO in allowing a variety of housing types meets the expectation of our modern income housing element. The issue that's not under our control is the market rents. It is likely that the market rents here will be higher than the 80% of median income. And the only way you can begin to address that is talk about inclusionary zoning tools where you're requiring at a certain percentage developed to be deed restricted, and then who tracks the deed restriction. It becomes an overly complicated. So this helps our situation because we can, again, as I've always said, we are creating the opportunities for a variety of housing types. Guaranteeing them to market rate is a whole nother story. And Centerville has a difficult time just given the desirability to get to a moderate income housing level. So the only way we'll have later discussions about is what are the strategies? Do we do something more than just the way we treat our zoning? And that's a tangent discussion to be done by December 31st. But it will help in that we're allowing an opportunity for a variety of housing.
So we've made best efforts.
Yeah.
Well, and I feel like he feels like it's very, I feel reassured that he's saying to me, we've got this hotel under contract, but yet if he's sure, then he should probably be okay with us saying, get the hotel started before you start your residential.
That's where we go wrestle in the jello or the mud and figure out what that final answer is.
So that would be mine. I would like to see the hotel started before the residential. I would also like to see maybe a little bit less density.
And as we look for control in these areas, you're saying we do need to see them in the conceptual because the council won't see the
correct
details of the final.
Well, the council approves the PDO agreement, correct? The development agreement. There would be a development agreement.
It's one way to enter. We have a development agreement with the Legacy, the Legacy Crossing.
Right.
We do only have a PDO approval for the trails. This one is written as only a PDO approval. If you want to translate that into a development agreement, you could.
I apologize. I thought that's where we were going. To me, this is a critical enough development that a development agreement seems like it
we
may
certainly,
make
if the
sense.
direction is, if you're tabling, it seems the likelihood, to hash out a couple of issues and hash out the issue with our city attorney and the developer agreement, solidifying those issues. You could do that.
I'm flexible with that. I would say that you say we just did the, based on PDO approval with the Fred Hale development, and that has given us enough retained control that we have seen an example of him coming back in and saying this commercial isn't going, can I can I do this other thing instead? And we just said, no, we want you to wait it out. We need that commercial element there. So I feel like it gives us enough power. I want us to find the balance between getting, of course, the best result and feeling really comfortable with it, but also respecting, to Mr. Oligschlager's point, the obvious level of behind-the-scenes arm wrestling and work that has already been done. The question of if we're stating a bunch of concerns and possibly even considering saying no to this or tweaking it a lot, what is it we're waiting for in place of, right? And what value would that bring to our city, and would our citizens be glad for us doing that or possibly severely disappointed? So, I mean, this council is going to do what they're going to do, but in consideration of what I see as a huge amount of background work to get us a really good product here tonight, I would feel comfortable moving to approve the conceptual with the needed conditions stated so that it comes back right in the final.
Can I ask the developer one more or two more questions? What are the size of the units approximately? Square footage?
Square footage, they would be, good question. We do not have floor plans yet. It's pretty preliminary, but my guess would be somewhere between 900 and 1,200 square feet.
And multiple layouts?
Yes, 1, 2, and 3 bedroom.
Okay.
Layouts.
Second question. From my own driving on Parish Lane, have never been comfortable with school kids and traffic. What is school access? Is it strictly walking?
Could I speak to that?
Yeah.
Please, that would be great.
Sure.
I have learned that from all the other apartments over there, Legacy Crossing and Fred Hale's apartments, there's only 8 elementary school kids from those apartments. They need 10, I've been told, to have a bus come over there. So hopefully you have at least 2 more elementary school kids in that apartment complex so that the school district will send a bus over there.
There was reports of a bus.
They do have a bus.
There was a bus already.
Do you have a bus?
Yeah, there is a bus that goes there. One stop.
One
There's
stop.
a bus.
To the,
What school does
to
it go
the.
Taylor.
To Taylor Elementary.
Oh, okay. Well,
And no bus to the
I
junior
stand
high.
corrected then.
But none to the junior high.
And that must be fairly new, because I talked to a mother and the school in the last 2
Most of them are
months.
not.
Is that where I
There
got
is
my
a bus.
numbers? Was
Yeah.
from you? Okay.
No, I didn't give you the numbers, but I had a mother that came and she had a child that was trying to walk to J. Taylor. And so she was asking me for routes, and so we talked to J. Taylor, and then we talked to Centerville Elementary, and they both said they'd been promised a bus, but that there wasn't one at this time. And so they wanted the kids to go straight along over to Pages Lane and then up to J. Taylor.
I think we need to get you a definitive answer
So I don't
on
know.
on the busing issue.
That would be good.
Right,
I think it would be helpful.
directly from the
Sounds
school.
like there is one, but
I mean,
Nice to have a
you know
commitment.
that from
My kids have been
experience.
on it, so.
Well, in regards to the motion that you've made, I'm just going to signal that, I won't second it simply because if Corey wants to go wrestle in mud or jello, as he said, to raise the level of confidence of the city council that they're getting what they think they're getting and addressing the mayor's concerns as well, I would be more apt to table it to make sure that process happens so that the developer knows that we're serious about it versus forcing a vote tonight and then having those reservations and potentially having it fail. Because I'm not hearing, absolute no's. There's just things that need to be adjusted in order to make it viable. I think. I don't know. That's kind of where I'm headed on that.
I would move that we,
We still have a second on the table, right?
Well,
Oh,
was
do
that
we?
a motion, or you just
No,
said
I
you're in
was
favor?
just saying I would
I think she
be
was just saying she
in
was
Oh, I
in
thought I heard it as a
favor, but
motion.
it wasn't a motion. So
I
we don't
didn't.
have a motion on the table.
I would move to direct staff to work with the developer to get the questions answered that have been expressed. We've had the public hearing, and that it come back to our next city council meeting.
Second.
So moved and seconded, we table this matter and direct staff to get questions answered. Do you want to direct staff on whether a development agreement is needed or whether this PDO as presented is the right approach? Or you want to investigate that some more?
Well, I've expressed my concerns about
think
entry access onto Parish Lane. I don't know if anyone else feels the same. A development agreement would limit that.
I think they've already said it's.
Development agreement will give you a lot more specificity.
One half says it's a dead issue, the other half says he's still fighting for it, so.
Right. I like 100% assurity, right?
Fair
on
state.
which way.
If you want 100% assurity, the development agreement gives you more of that, but it's not as flexible.
But I may be lone voice on that, so.
No, I actually, my feelings would, and I have to respect the story that you told, and I don't know where it was and what the circumstances are. I am actually more concerned about the traffic on 1250 than some of it dumping out onto Parish Lane. I would prefer to see the Parish Lane, but I don't understand what, I'm not feeling the pain of what you described.
Well, and I'm actually taking it from a standpoint of more logical than emotional. I just look at it as I've seen that exact layout almost, you couldn't be any better in terms of the layout, and this individual was nearly killed because of the way the access was. And the development isn't that old. So, it's rather recent. So it was concerning to me that sort of accident took place. And would a traffic light have mitigated the other actions of the other driver? It's debatable, but at least there would have been more visual cues for both parties involved.
So the motion on the table is to table this and direct staff to come back with, work with the developer on the answers to some of these questions without clear direction whether this is to be done via development agreement or whether it can be accomplished with the.
And I think we should be as clear as possible in our direction so that we can take care of this.
And maybe it's appropriate to ask the developer if you're opposed to a development agreement or feel strongly about one path or the other.
And I would like
mud or jello wrestling. If you're opposed to either one, we'll instruct Corey to know.
I would like staff's opinion on that as well, the pros and cons to development agreement versus not.
I think we're open to either. I think that the PDO process gives this body enough structure to be able to make sure that it ends up with the product that you want. But if you would like a development agreement, we can do that. We're open to that. With regards to the access, just very quickly, what we're proposing is solely a right into the project because of those concerns. We don't think there's any chance of getting a right out because of traffic issues, right, safety issues. What we would like to see happen would be a right in, so that a hotel customer, instead of having to turn onto 1250 and then make a left to get into the hotel, could simply proceed west on Parish and then just make an easy right-hand turn into the parking lot. And then when you wanted to leave the hotel, you would go out onto 1250. So that's just a little bit of clarification. Again,
that's a good clarification.
Yeah, it's not likely that we can get it, but we're going to try because we feel like that is the best. That's the best for the traffic movements. It's the best for the customers of the hotel.
And reduces left-hand turns, which is kind of one of the safety concerns, right?
That's exactly right.
But there'll probably be more traffic generated from the residential units than the hotel.
That's a good question. I don't know the answer to that.
Pretty sure. Yeah, there's
I honestly don't know.
Your hotel traffic will be.
Corey, do you have an opinion on development agreement versus PDO?
I believe the PD ordinance says you may require to enter into development agreement, so it's an optional clause to you. Opinion, zoning is zoning and a development agreement is a contractual agreement. So you add in the contractual agreement from a city to a developer in a development agreement. So you not only have the zoning issue, you have to come back and amend the contract. So cities will often use development agreements because it seems like the contractual agreement resolves any disputing going on at some point and gives clarity to the approval in a customized zone. So I think you can go either way. We've got good examples where we did one. I think the purpose of that one is everything was missing infrastructure, and new roads were going in, and the phasing was complex.
Lots of different uses, too.
With the Fred Hale, it was fairly easy to just leave it into PDO, and I would say that this is most likely closer to Fred Hale's development in its complexity of implementation than the theater was.
That's my assessment, is that if we're comparing the two experiences, this one's much closer to the Fred Hale. Lisa, do you have an opinion on that?
No, I agree with Corey on that one. I mean, this is a much smaller project. With the Legacy Crossing, we did have a lot of infrastructure, and we debated the phasing quite a bit, and it was very complicated what had to go in. I think we had 6 phases in that.
Cross easements. And
still have some left, right?
Yeah. So on this one, if you look at the sample ordinance, essentially we're putting in all of those conditions into the rezone. So if, for instance, you want to address traffic, you would add another condition to the conditions in the rezone. So if they ever wanted to change that, it would actually be a legislative decision that comes back to you to change the condition of the PDO. Now with Legacy Crossing, and so that's what we've been doing with the Legacy Trail Apartments, the Fred Hale project. They come back in and we amend the PDO because we don't have a development agreement. On Legacy Crossing, we added in a number of layers, which I call the governing documents, but we have the PDO, the development agreement, the cross-access easements, and then the covenants and restrictions. So whenever somebody wants to amend something, if you recall, we amend 4 documents, and it's fairly complicated. So
hence the discussion on parking 2 meetings ago.
Yes, yeah, where we had to amend not only the cross-access easement, but also the development agreement. But so I think this one, you know, if you want a development agreement, we're happy to do that. But I also think you can do that as part of the conditions of the PDO, where you just add some more specifics. But I think you need to give staff the direction that yes, we want you to come back with some specifics on traffic, or the next time around, I guess you could say, yes, we're approving this subject to getting the traffic study, or subject to this. So.
I'm wondering how the rest of the council feels about the density, if they're okay with it that high, or if you'd like it to be. I mean, as long as they're going to be looking at this and he's going to be wrestling, do we want to look at a little bit lower density?
I always want to look at a little lower density, but maybe that's
what, I don't know, that's what I'm asking.
Well, I think at some point you reach the threshold of market viability given the footprint of the property. And that's where I'm looking at this one going, you may be at the threshold.
And that's what I was wondering, possible. And I wondered how he felt about that, if he thought he could do it with any less.
A developer's going to tell you can do more with less, and no, that's never going to happen, right?
Well, recognizing the fact that are you familiar with could you come back up again? Are you familiar with what we so fondly frequently call the Hafoka property?
I am a little bit familiar with that property, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's my understanding that average sales price was 10 to 15% higher than what they at least discussed going in.
Okay.
Recognizing that kind of an environment, I would encourage you to do anything you can to attempt to reduce the density.
Okay.
So as Corey has these discussions, I don't know what kind of prices you've put in. I'm not trying to get into your business, but recognize that the Centerville address is very popular. Does that help, Robin?
Yeah, thank you.
That was well put.
So the motion on the table is to table this and have staff address the questions and concerns that have been expressed tonight and come back at the next regular scheduled meeting.
Can I amend my motion to say, and deferring to what Corey and Lisa said, with just a PDO agreement?
I would second that.
All right, we'll consider the motion to be amended such.
What was the amendment again?
Well, this is
just using a PDO agreement and not a...
Oh, not a development agreement, okay.
I consider that a clarification, not an amendment.
Whatever it is.
So let's, if we're ready to vote, let's do a roll call vote, starting with Robin.
Aye.
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 Okay, we'll see you in 3 weeks and 1 day. Thank you for the significant amount of work and effort that you put into this. I haven't seen something so well prepared at the first, I guess this isn't really the first, first submittal.
First official round.
I hate to keep our Trails Committee waiting any longer, but I suspect really need a 5-minute break.
We can do that.
We'll still be here.
We'll shoot for a 3-minute break.
3-minute break.
I have stalled Marcus off by text until Marcus can come about 10:30.
3 weeks.
No, you can take it. No, you don't. Just gonna redo the meeting. I think we should just do it ourselves. The problem is you're gonna have these next, same things next time. Maybe when we get back together, you can ask the council what they wish you had. I can send Marcus a text.
Okay.
No, it's not.
We're almost done, aren't we? Yeah. It said 11, we'll still be here.
We told Steve to call Marcus off.
Oh, oh my gosh. It is so hard. I've had to do that sometimes where you're at the end of the agenda and it's so hard after you're almost asleep. It's harder not being here and then just coming.
Well, and when we've looked it over, and if there aren't any major questions or concerns, please, let's just move along, move along. How you doing, Katie? How are you? Good. How's Sam? Is she loving school? She is. She commutes, right? So is that going all right?
Yeah, it's great.
Good.
She loves where she's at. She belongs there.
So good.
which I'm really relieved about. I was kind of nervous, did I tell you that? I was kind of nervous about her roommates and just like from first impressions and stuff. I'm like, I don't know how this is going to be.
I knew that was going to happen
So they were all strangers to her?
Uh-huh.
Okay.
All
That's great.
6 of them.